everybody, I think, right?
We have quorum, we have the professionals.
And I
Mr.
think Mr.
O'Brien,
O'Brien's team is here.
Yep, we're ready to go.
Mike,
All right, let me, Mike, you good? Okay. All right. Okay, Frank, whenever you're ready.
Okay, ready. Good evening.
Go ahead.
Welcome to the Township of Hillsborough Board of Adjustment public meeting for Wednesday, April 7th, 2021, which will be conducted virtually. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This meeting will be conducted virtually. All board members, consultants, and staff will be participating remotely. The public will be given an opportunity to participate remotely through the advertised Zoom link or optional phone numbers identified in the public meeting notice. The public should use the raise hand feature in Zoom or *9 if participating by telephone to indicate that you would like to be recognized to speak. Application documents were made available for inspection on the township website at least 10 calendar days prior to the scheduled meeting date in accordance with the meeting notice. Applicants and their professionals will be presenting remotely and will identify themselves before testifying. This meeting has been duly advertised according to Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, the Sunshine Law. Notice of the 2021 annual meeting schedule has been provided to the officially designated newspapers, the township clerk, posted on the bulletin board at the township municipal complex, and posted on the township's website. Additional notice has been provided to communicate that this meeting is being conducted according to the governor's executive office or orders and pursuant to Public Law 2020 C.11, which allows for meetings to be conducted electronically, and pursuant to the local finance notices recently established in the state of New Jersey. Roll call, please, Mike.
Mr. Sirachi is absent this evening. Mr. Vincher?
here.
Ms. Comfer?
Here.
Mr. Stamler?
Here.
Ms. Salili?
Here.
Mr. Valchek?
Here.
Mr. Walmacher?
Here.
Vice Chair Haynes?
Here.
Chair Herbert?
Here.
Mr. Kinsler?
Here.
Mr. Gorman?
Here.
Mr. Euro?
Here.
And Mr. Anderson?
I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, we don't have meeting minutes tonight, so next is business order business is consideration of resolutions. We have two of them this evening. Stacy and John Macarelli, file BA 20-70. Any board discussion on this?
On motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please. And who's entitled to vote on this one?
I have Mr. Vincher, Ms. Comfer, Mr. Stamler, Mr. Valchek, Mr. Walmacher, Vice Chair Haynes, and Chair Herbert.
Okay, please call them, please.
Okay. Mr. Vincher?
Yes.
Ms. Comfer?
Yes.
Mr. Stamler?
Yes.
Mr. Valchek?
Yes.
Mr. Walmacher?
Yes.
Vice Chair Haynes?
Yes.
Chair Herbert?
Yes. The next resolution to be considered is Emilio and Francine Monaco, file BA 29. Board discussion on this one? If not.
On motion to approve.
Second.
Check.
Mike, please take roll on this one.
Ms. Comfer?
Yes.
Mr. Stamler?
Yes.
Ms. Salili?
Yes.
Mr. Valchek?
Yes.
Mr. Walmacher?
Yes.
Vice Chair Haynes?
Yes.
Chair Herbert?
Yes. Okay, next is Board of Adjustment business. Now, the members of the board will be receiving a memo from me before the next meeting, probably in the next week, about the subcommittee activity. We did meet with the planning department and we have a recommendation for the board to be discussed at our next meeting. So you can look forward to that memo. This next business from the floor, for anybody in the public that has something to tell the board that's not on the schedule tonight. So Fred, would you open the lines for that, please?
Sure. Again, anybody in the pub has a matter that they'd like to discuss that's not on this evening's agenda, please raise your hand. If you're allowed to talk, please state your name and address for the record, spelling your name. I see none, Chairman, so I
Okay.
think you can proceed to the app.
Good, then we'll move on to our one and only public hearing tonight, which is Harvesters Gospel Center, file BA 19-22. Patrick, would you reintroduce that one, please? Patrick, you're on mute.
Patrick, you got to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yep.
That's okay.
So tonight's only application, Harvesters Gospel Center, located at block 203.10, lot 30. The applicant is before us again for a preliminary and final major site plan approval, possible variances, waivers, and to construct in addition to the existing residential dwelling for a church. And there was a former parsonage, which is not the case at this point. And associate other landscaping, lighting, plantings, and other improvements. This is located in the residential district. Prior hearings that included testimony was December 2nd, 2020, continued on March 17th, 2021. Time of decision is 4/30/2020.
Thank you. Okay, next, I'm going to ask our
I'm sorry,
attorney,
2021.
Mark Anderson, to just briefly tell the public what happens at these meetings, the process we follow, because some of you may not know what happens at these meetings. So Mark, would you just go through that again, please?
All right. This is something that I touched on at the last meeting. So those who were at the last meeting may find this a repeat. I did go over the specifics that were requested by the applicant last meeting. I don't think that's necessary now because we're well into this. So I'm at the chairman's request going to touch on really the procedure, and particularly as it may affect those people who are may not be most familiar with this type of application. The procedure in this application, as in others before this board, is that the applicant gets the opportunity to present its application through its witnesses. We are in that process now. We are still within the applicant's presentation, although the applicant has already presented some witnesses. Applicant's witnesses will be called individually by the applicant's lawyer. The applicant's lawyer will examine the witness, ask the witness to explain those things which the witness knows or is qualified to testify about. After the applicant is satisfied that the information from the witness has been presented, then the board and the board's professionals, that's the engineer, Mr. Gorman, the planner, and myself, would have an opportunity to ask questions we think might help illuminate the discussion. And then the public will be given the opportunity to cross-examine those witnesses individually, one at a time. It is important to recognize that when a member of the public cross-examines a witness, it is only as to the testimony of that witness. There being some objectors are represented by Mr. Mensch, and at least by tradition, those who are represented by attorneys are allowed to go first. I should say that although I've given you the kind of the strict order of things, people shouldn't be too surprised if board members and maybe even occasionally board professionals ask questions during the presentation by witnesses. That's not uncommon and not inappropriate. Once the witness has presented all of its witnesses, then anyone who's objecting or even has a position on the application will be heard. Same order, the objectors present their witnesses. Those witnesses are subject to questions by the board and the board's professionals, and those witnesses are subject to questions by others, including, of course, the applicant's lawyer. Again, by tradition, objectors who are represented by lawyers would go first, and objectors' lawyers will call their witnesses. Once all of the objectors have been heard, the testimony and comments by the public will be taken. And let me emphasize there are 4 important rules for anyone who wants to speak either for or against this application outside of the applicant and the objectors who are represented. First rule, you got to do it at the right time. The chairman will tell you when that time has come, but don't make statements when it is not the right time. First of all, it interrupts the progress of the meeting. And the other thing is the board is not entitled to take in consideration any testimony or any statement that is not made under oath. So that is the second rule. Those people who want to testify, again, for or against, have to be sworn the same as the other witnesses. You'll see that process as the applicant and objectors proceed. The third rule is, like any other witness, a person who testifies in this case is subject to cross-examination. Questions by board members, board's professionals, by applicant's lawyer, by the objector's lawyer, whoever feels it is necessary to ask questions. And then the fourth rule is that the State Department of Community Affairs, which has established rules for remote meetings of this sort, says that anyone who wants to testify in a meeting like this must appear by video. So just so that everybody knows in advance, if you want to testify, if you want to make comments that you want the board to accept, you must appear by video. You cannot do it simply by audio. Once the comments from the public and testimony from the public is taken, the applicant will be given an opportunity to present its closing statement and position, as will the objector's attorney. Following that, all of the public portion will be closed. Again, the chairman will announce that we have come to that point, after which there will be no more testimony, no more comments from people, no more examination of witnesses. The board will undertake their deliberations and their discussions about what to do with this application, to accept it, to approve it, to reject it, to approve it with conditions, whatever the board believes is the appropriate thing. Following those deliberations, the board will arrive at a decision. That decision will be done by roll call vote. Some of these things may or may not be reached tonight. As I said at the beginning, we are at the applicant's witnesses. So if this matter is not concluded tonight, then it will be carried to another meeting. Typically with a situation like this, the board will establish the date of that meeting. So anybody in attendance tonight will know what that is and will indicate that that will be without the applicant having to provide further public notice, either by mailings or in the newspaper. But again, obviously, I don't know whether the matter will be completed tonight, but that will be the order in which things will be considered, whether it's all completed tonight or whether it gets carried to further meeting or meetings.
Hey, thank you very much, Mark. We should record that so in case for the next meeting, you won't have to do it again. Thank you very much. Okay, so where we left off at the last meeting, the applicant's traffic engineer, Mr. Dean, had just finished taking public questions from the public. We had the last person raise their hand. Accidentally, I think, didn't have a question and nobody else raised their hand. So I said, let's move on. I gave it back to Mr. Ogrodnik for where he wanted to go next. And then we determined we're going to be meeting again tonight. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Ogrodnik, and just it's a good point that we're still in the public portion of the meeting. So Mr. Ogrodnik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As indicated, this is our third hearing going back to December 2nd, March 17th. If there's any new members of the public, this is an application for a house of worship or church, which proposes keeping the existing residential structure in the front and constructing a 5,800 square foot building on the site. The existing house would be maintained as the meeting center and office. The proposed addition for the church would be 180 seats. This church is a permitted use in the R zone as a conditional use and is considered an inherently beneficial use under municipal land use law. And this application necessitates a D3 conditional use variance because we don't meet the specific conditions of the R zone for a house of worship as follows. There is a existing lot width variance, 195 feet is existing and then proposed, and 200 feet is required, as well as impervious surface, which as we all know, we've had great discussion on. We had suggested initially 17.5%, but after comments from the first hearing that were essentially related to engineering site plan, we were able to redesign the site to reduce it to 15.87%, which is less than 1% above the permitted 15%. Importantly, since the parsonage use, which we had originally proposed, was eliminated, David Maskey, the board planner, had determined that D1 use variances are not needed for the residential dwelling meeting center in conjunction with the separate house of worship under section 18874A, which states that no lot shall contain more than one principal building. Section 18874B, no lot shall contain more than one principal use. And section 188C74C, no building shall contain more than one principal use. Time permitted tonight, we are certainly going to attempt to close out our testimony. I have 4 witnesses. I have Craig Stiers, our civil engineer from Stiers and Associates, and he's going to explain the changes to the site plan since our last hearing. Again, there was just some questions about impervious coverage related to the various options for the different width of the roadway, which we're seeking a waiver for, 24 feet versus the 30 foot, as well as the width and length of the parking spaces. We also have Chris Howe, our architect. He had submitted floor plans and some renderings of the structure, and he will just quickly touch on his vision for this project, as well as the materials that he anticipates if the board so shall approve. We also have Pastor Fred Sue, who's going to be the lead pastor of this house of worship, is currently the pastor. And we also have, to close out our testimony, Christine Nazaro-Cafone, who's our professional planner. And she's going to go over the standards for the relief that's requested in this application. Unless there's any questions of me, I don't anticipate reintroducing Gary Dean. My understanding was we closed out his testimony and would like to move to Mr. Stiers, who's been sworn in.
Mr. Ogronic, this is Fred Kinsler, IT. I just wanted to know, do you envision Mr. Stiers and Mr. Howe both sharing their screens and showing it? Or do you need me to, or?
I would guess that Mr. Stiers will share the screen, and then I would request that you perhaps we'll ask Mr. Howe if he's comfortable with that, but I would suggest you may want to be ready with the architectural.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so I'll give Mr. Stiers, you'll have permission, Mr. Stiers, to go ahead and share your screen. Thank you, Mr. O'Grant.
Okay, Craig.
All right.
Thank you.
You guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I can just go to the site plan. As Mike said, there really are no changes to the plans per se. There was some, I guess we had some dialogue regarding whether to utilize what we have presented on the plans and submitted is our 9 foot space, 9 foot wide by 18 foot long parking spaces. And we got into a dialogue last meeting whether to possibly increase to 9.5 foot spaces. So I know the dialogue was going back and forth, and we got till tonight, but I just wanted to get some information to maybe help with your decision.
Excuse me, Mr. Stiers. Mr. Chairman, do we need to swear him in, or is he under oath? I haven't heard Mr. Anderson anything say.
He's still in the road, Mr. Stiers.
I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So if we were to increase the parking space to 9.5 foot wide, That would increase the coverage by 1,037 square feet, or increase the coverage to, it would be, end up being 16.35%. So I just kind of wanted to give that to the board for discussion purposes, whether that continues on or a decision is made one way or the other. You have solid numbers on which way to go.
Can you give us those
Greg,
numbers one more time?
Okay.
It's John Stamler. I have a question about I thought by going 10 by 18 for the spaces, it would change the impervious to 16.37. That's the figure we came up with before we adjourned last time.
Well, I think we were speculating on a number just based on square footage of the spaces. I
Okay,
think you have to keep in mind that there's also, as it pushes out, so does the aisle.
right.
So it gets a little bit more complicated than just, you know, the square footage of the space itself.
Okay, so you're saying 9.5 by 18, and
Correct. Yep.
that would increase it to, what was the number?
The final number would be 16.35%.
Okay, thank
And
you.
how many additional square feet?
The additional square footage would be 1,037 square feet.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's really, I just wanted to give the board that additional information so they, you know, make a decision one way or the other. Just as a further update to the approvals related to the project, we essentially have DRCC approval. The only condition is to supply them with the resolution from the board, and that would be the final approval. And additionally, after a long and arduous process, we actually received the wetlands permit today. So that is also approved by the DEP. So essentially we have all the approvals with the exception of, you know, which way the board goes with the application.
Craig, I have a question about the DEP letter that came in yesterday, I guess. It mentioned under number 6 that they've determined they are intermediate value wetlands, and it requires a 50-foot buffer. Are you meeting that requirement?
So what happened was we got essentially what happened is an LOI, or a letter of interpretation. That's what they determined the wetlands to be with the buffer. However, at the same time, we got a general permit to fill those wetlands. So it's kind of irrelevant what the buffer is, because the permit that we received is to fill them, which would allow the project to move forward as it's designed.
Okay, so there, you don't need the 50-foot buffer. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Correct. No problem.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if the proposal is for 9.5 wide spaces, the waiver will still be required because this does not mean the minimum width of 10 feet.
That's correct. So that's really I would say, unless there's any other questions, kind of the status or the update of, you know, of the plans themselves since the last meeting and the discussions we've had on our side.
Mr. Stiers, Bob Euro. If the board, if it's decided to go to 9.5 by 18 with the increase of 1,037 square feet, will that have any impact to your drainage system and your stormwater management?
Yes, and it's essentially, it would impact everything, as negligible as it seems. But the shift of the parking obviously would shift some of the landscaping. It would shift some of the lighting, because for example, the islands in the back would all shift, you know, as little as it may be, they're all going to shift. So the plans have to be updated. The stormwater would be impacted. I would say it's negligible, but it would have an impact. Yes.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
You finished, Mr. Stern?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Grodnick? Okay, so, okay, let me open up to public questions from the public then. And if the board's finished, so Fred, would you?
Sure. Anybody from any questions for Mr. Stiers? If you do, please raise your hand. Any professionals, anybody? I see none, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grodner?
Yep. Oh, wait a minute.
Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
if we're
Mr.
otherwise
Anderson.
done with questions with Mr. Stiers, I do have at least one question for him.
Okay, I think Fred Starr
Well,
public.
why don't you go first, Mr. Anderson, and then I'll let the public person speak after you, or would you rather the other way around?
I can ask first. I don't think it'll probably relate to anything that a member of the public is going to ask. Mr. Stiers, you have a plan on the shared screen at the moment. This is actually the landscaping plan. But it's not clear to me what that represents. It's not large enough for me to actually read the latest revision. I'm trying to compare it with the latest one that I have. Can you tell me what the latest revision is of what you're showing? And what does this show with respect to parking?
This is the plans that were submitted. So like I said, there has been nothing new submitted to the board since the last meeting. It's 2/19/21 were the last comment or revisions.
And this has a 9-foot wide spot.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, this shows 9 foot wide.
Yes, yes.
All right. I asked the question because it's important that the board know if it chooses to approve that this is not the plan. If it wanted the 9.5 foot,
Right.
the plans would have to be modified.
Correct.
But that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, there is one, so let's, I'm going to promote them. Shirley, could you please go ahead and unmute yourself and state your name and address for the record? Spelling your last name, please.
Okay. You hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead and state your name and address and spell your last name, please.
Okay, my name is Shirley Marlatt. I live at 480 Hillsborough Road. My last name is Marlatt.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a question for Mr. Stiers. If that parking lot is paved, what will it do to the water table?
To the water table?
Yeah,
In the area of the pavement, most likely nothing. The runoff from the parking lot would be collected and directed towards the basin, which is located in the front, in this area right here. And
well, you
we
see,
have,
my property is next to the property. And all of those parking spaces face my yard. So it would be, if the parking spaces are 9 by, or whatever you said, 9.5 by whatever, there would be probably 200 feet of parking space along there. And then that brings up the problem of lights. And I don't know if this is the place to mention it or not, but anyway, lights and noise and
You can ask him how.
emissions.
You can ask him
Pardon?
questions. You can ask him questions about that.
I can what?
You can ask him questions about that. You can ask him if the
Well-
light's going to affect your property, for instance.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like there's not going to be any runoff from those parking spaces.
there's gonna be no runoff directed to your property now from the parking spaces.
No runoff.
From the parking spaces, no.
No, my property is a little bit lower than that parking lot. Where's the water going to go?
Your property is in this location right here, and the
That's
collection
right.
of the-
My property is all the way along that line.
and the collection of the runoff will go into the basin in this location and discharge to the storm sewer in this location, and then ultimately drain out to the north.
Okay, now I have a question about the buffer, because is the buffer trees and bushes, or what kind of trees?
It's a mix of trees and bushes, yes. There's deciduous and there's evergreens. So the evergreens would be Obviously, your concern would be buffering year round. And then the deciduous would mix in, obviously, this time of year through the fall.
And how much noise and light will be covered by the deciduous trees the rest of the year? And how tall will they be? Because it said somewhere that lights were going to be on poles that were 15 feet high.
Yes,
I don't know if you think that one or not, but
the lighting for the parking lot would be on poles along the side of the parking lot. They would be directed downwards. They're 15-foot high, as you said, and they would be turned off. I believe we said within an hour after the use of the church.
somewhere I saw 9 o'clock.
Again, it depends on when the use of the church was finished. So if they finished at 7, it would be turned off most likely by 8. So it all depends on when the usage was being done.
But that's not considered pollution.
Like I said, they're 15-foot high. They're directed down towards the parking lot. I don't believe so. No. Again, we have the mix of the trees around the perimeter of the parking lot to try and buffer the parking lot and the church itself.
If the poles are 15 feet high, how tall are the trees? Somewhere I saw 10 to 12 feet, but
The trees are going to be planted at 14 to 16 feet. The evergreens 8 to 10 feet. So they'll pretty well established just even in the initial planting.
well, I don't understand why you're putting in deciduous trees, because I can't see where they're going to block anything.
I think they said it's gonna be a mix.
Yes.
Going to be what?
Mix.
Go ahead, Craig, answer it.
It's going to be a mix. It's going to be a
How
mix.
tall are the evergreen trees?
I said 8 to 10 feet.
Well, then they won't block the lights, will they?
All right, let's go back to the chart again. He mentioned the height at what they're gonna be planted at.
The shade trees or the deciduous
Okay.
would be 14 to 16 feet. And the evergreens would be planted at between 6 and 8 and some at 8 to 10.
Okay, I don't know.
Craig, let me ask this question. Well,
How wide is your buffer?
30 feet on your side.
Okay.
Craig, will any of the lights shine on her property? My next question will be, can you see the light from her property? So those are the two issues, right?
I mean, as you can see, a lot of the evergreens are in front of the parking itself, whereas, in the front here, they become a little bit more deciduous, but there is no parking in this area. So the bulk of the evergreens are along the area where the parking spaces are.
Well, this buffer looks like it'll be 35 to 40 feet from the windows of my house.
Well, the property line here, and then it's 30 feet wide. And you can see the edge of your house in this location right here. So relatively speaking, your house appears to be 50 feet from the property line.
I haven't measured it. I don't know. But there's nothing between that buffer and my house. And these trees are supposed to be planted on the property line, or
Yes,
how far from the property line?
it's a 30-foot buffer, so they're planted from the property line all the way through that 30-foot buffer.
And there'll be 25 cars parked facing my house. And this buffer is gonna buffer the noise and the emissions and the light and everything. I'm not gonna be able to see any of these things, right?
That is the intent. That is the intention.
What do you say?
That's the intention.
Yeah.
And again, Craig, the lights are not going to shine on her property, right?
The parking lot lights, no.
They're not gonna
Parking lot
shine
lights.
on my house, it's right next door.
Your house is going to be approximately 130 plus 50, 80 feet from the parking lot.
No,
Okay.
not that far. Mm-mm.
Is there a question?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Hey, Craig, it's Pat Gorman.
What?
Well, one thing that may help in this situation would providing some back shielding to those lights help prevent any potential glare from going onto a neighbor's property at that point.
Obviously, the shielding would improve it. Yes, we do meet the ordinance as they are designed right now. The back shielding would obviously add another level of buffering.
Miss Marlott, do you have any more questions for this witness at this
Yes.
time?
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
Okay.
I have a pool in my backyard, which is about at the same level as the church. So all of these cars are going to be parked facing my yard and the pool. And is it possible to put up a high fence to block everything? Because I don't believe that the trees are going to be big enough and full enough to block out all this other things.
That's a good question.
Yes, a fence can be installed. I mean, I can't say no, it can't. That is a distinct possibility. Yes, the board so chooses.
Okay, because those cars are going to be at least, that parking lot is going to be at least 250 feet long. And that's a pretty good piece of my property.
Greg, what type of fence would you be thinking?
Okay.
One of those white vinyl fences?
All right.
I mean, we could put whatever the board, we could go board on board. We could put a stockade, we could put PVC. I think it would be more important to choose, if the board were to so choose, is how high? So
high enough to block the traffic, the headlights.
How about trees? How about trees plus a fence?
That's what I'm thinking of.
That's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about a fence with no trees. We're looking, Shirley, we're discussing it now, okay? We feel for you, and that's why we're going to discuss it.
No.
Hold on.
No more questions. Go ahead.
No, Shirley, we're going to try to help you out here. Craig, a 4 foot, I don't know, how's the other board members? I think 4 feet. I don't think you'd have to go 6 because we're looking to.
I don't think you'd want to go 6. It'd be sort of like.
Oh, no, then it's going to look right. 4 feet would block, the visual plus the headlights.
4 feet won't do it.
Jesus. I'm done.
Ms. Marlott, any more questions for this witness?
Cheryl, any more questions?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Any other question? Anybody else in the public not represented?
Yes. Yes, there is another one, Chairman.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. I just lost them. Where'd they go?
You unmuted yourself?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Could you state your name and address for the record, spelling your last name, please?
Did you unmute?
Yeah, unmuted.
My name is Lisa Elwood, Elwood. I live at 35 Beverly Drive.
Thank you.
My question is also regarding the lighting. As was stated, the lights would be turned off about an hour after an activity ended. If an activity is going on at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, will there be lights on till midnight?
I don't believe, the pastor's going to speak after I'm done, but I don't believe that there's any activities going on that late.
Perhaps not now, but in the future, if there was a concert, a holiday gathering, is there anything that would limit the amount of light in the evening?
Again, they will speak to the operations at the church. Obviously, the lights have to be on in the evening for obviously for security and safety reasons. So the intent was to turn them off 1 hour after the completion of the activities.
But the time would vary and the intent may change. So do the neighbors have any protection against lights being on at midnight? I don't know if anybody from the board could help me out here.
I think we need to hear the testimony from the pastor to see what their hours of operation are going to be. Because I don't think anything is, they're proposing anything to go that late, and that wouldn't be a condition.
The neighbor is concerned about the future intent. Right now, we don't have anything going past 9 p.m. Tuesday night is 9 p.m. Saturday is 6 or 7. But the neighbor has a concern about the future intent. What we approve here and discuss is one thing, but what stops the pastor from
the condition that we put on the approval, and then it becomes an enforcement issue.
And of course, the pastor will be there in the immediate future, but should anything change within the church, should they rent out space in the evening, what would keep them from having lights on late at night? Are there any statutes within the township?
Well, this goes beyond questioning of the witness. I'm not at all sure this witness can answer questions about future activities. If he can, obviously he can testify, but if he cannot, then the question should be directed to someone who can answer them.
I think she's directing it at us, Mark.
I guess my point is no one can ensure what will happen with this property in the future.
Well, this is clearly not a question. This is a statement. As I indicated before, if you want a statement like that to be considered by the board, you have to do it at the right time and in the right manner.
My question is, can anything be done to ensure the hours that can be on?
Well, again, we're at this point, we're limited to questions of this witness. I certainly will not speak for whether the witness can answer the question. If he can, that's fine. If he can't, then the question needs to be held for someone who can answer it.
Okay, well, he was testifying to the amount of light, the height of the lights, the borders around the property that would keep the lights from affecting other people's homes. And the time of day would be a big issue. So when he was speaking to all these things and he was stating the intentions that he understands now, I am asking if all these intentions don't pan out, what can be done for the neighbors?
I'm not suggesting that you can't ask the question. I'm only saying that if the witness can answer it, I'm sure he will. But if he cannot, then it needs to be directed to someone who can.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe this will help you, Mr. Stires. What will be the perception of those lights from Beverly Drive and even next door? Okay, first of all, how much light is actually going to go off the site and shine on the other property, nearby properties?
Oh, I'm sorry. Again, the lighting is downward facing. It is only 15 foot high, and it does meet the ordinance requirements.
And what does that mean?
So if you look at the lighting plan, which is on the screen, essentially the illumination levels, which is the really the way it's measured, the lighting levels at the property line along the western side are 0.
Okay, so no shine, no light shines on the next property.
Correct, and that does not include the effect of the trees themselves. So this is based on no trees at all. Keep in mind that Beverly Drive is on the one property over. So this is the next property, which the person that was just speaking, that's another 200 feet. And then I would presume that they're somewhere along Beverly Drive, that's at least 200 to 300 feet away.
Okay,
and
so
we're talking lighting at 0 at the property line.
Okay, so you established that no light will shine off the property.
There's no light spillage off the property. That's correct.
Second question, will they be able to see the lights at all from Beverly Drive? Will they know they're there, especially with the shield that you talked about before?
I have an aerial photograph that is on the screen. So you have the subject property, the property to the west, and then you have Beverly Drive. You can see the number of trees that are in the property just to the west. So I can't specifically say, looking out their back window, will they ever see lighting? But the possibility, because they're downward directed, they're only 15 feet high, the effect on them, I would say, is negligible.
Right, and they,
I mean, the question could be, do they have a light out their back of their house? It could be a similar effect.
so with a back shield, chances are they can't even see they will not see the bulb, for instance.
They would not see the source if it was back shielded, yes.
Okay. Okay,
All right,
so
Frank, let's go.
let's go.
Ms. Elwood, any more questions for the witness?
Are there any lights on the building that will be on for security and safety purposes?
No, not that I believe, no. There may be something over the doorway, but no, at this point, just the pole lights.
And is there anything, if the pole lights were not found to be sufficient for any reason, could taller lights be put in the future?
The way the design has been completed, it meets the ordinance requirements for lighting of the parking lot.
Lisa, we're approving this as the site plan. We're approving this application as it states.
I understand my questions are about the future of the property. Once the application is approved and someone is on that site, they will be free to do other things that will have an impact on the neighborhood. And I'm not just asking about neighbors on Beverly Drive. I'm asking about neighbors in the vicinity.
Well, I would think to help you, and I don't know if we're dancing around the answer, but if this application is approved, it's going to be subject to a number of conditions that the applicant is going to need to meet. And if he doesn't meet the conditions, this is more legal, so I'll leave it up to the attorneys. But I believe they do not follow the conditions, they would either have to remedy them or return to the board. So they have to meet the conditions of the approval.
Okay.
And the applicant would have no objection to a condition limiting the height of the light poles.
I think we're finished with questioning, unless you see somebody else.
Ms. Elwood, are you done with this witness now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see no other hands, Chairman, so I think you can proceed.
Okay, well, back to you, Mr. O'Brien, with the next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next witness is our architect.
Is that Chris Howe?
Yes.
Hi, Chris. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
I just need to swear you in, okay?
Okay.
If you could raise your right hand. You swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And for the record, could you state and spell your name, please?
Chris Howe.
And can you spell your last name?
Hao, H-A-O.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Could you please describe to the board your professional experience as an architect?
About 30 years after graduated.
And where did you go to school?
Georgia Tech.
And you're a licensed architect in the state of New Jersey, sir?
Yes.
And have you appeared before other municipal boards in your career?
Yes.
About how many times would you guess?
Maybe for the past 25 years, like 4 or 5.
Okay.
Or maybe more. I never count.
Okay. Could you go over your vision for this, the construction of this building?
Okay, we can accept his qualifications.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies. Go ahead, Mr. Howie. Can you explain the building and also explain some of just the slight reduction in square footage that you had submitted as in response to our last hearing on March 17th?
Mr. Granick, is he going to share his screen or do you want Fred to share?
Yeah, share screen is good if you can do it, Mike. I cannot do a share screen myself here. Right, so
Okay, I will share some screens if you let me know what you need to see.
I will. All right.
Thank you.
There's only one architectural rendering.
Yeah. All right. First, the building itself, that from the thinking to start the design is that the first thing we're trying to do is to comply or to match the style of the neighborhood. So this Hillsborough is pretty much like a historical city, town or the region. So we try to respect all these houses or buildings around for the past, I'll say 2-3 centuries. So we get a sloped roof and then use all the natural material for the outside look. And also, because the scale of the building is rather a little bit larger than the houses around. So I try to break down the scale of the building to make it more look like a human scale. And also to blend the material in to match the neighborhood. Right? Just like, so it's more towards like a house look atmosphere. This, you want me to describe the materials or?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. If you look at the perspective that of this building, the bottom 3, 4, or 5 feet, we haven't determined yet, is the cultured stone or natural stone all around the perimeter of the house, of the building, of the church. And the middle part is a stucco, and it's a little bit lighter color. And at the top end of the stucco is a stress band to separate the top part to the middle part, and the top part will be cedar shake. I think cedar shake siding, but it's in vinyl version instead of the real wood cedar siding, because for the maintenance purpose. But today all this vinyl cedar siding, they made it look like a very natural and like a real cedar siding. Right? And the roof will be like all the houses around. It's an asphalt shingle roof.
Mr. Howe, and is it, could you speak to the improvements, the aesthetic and street view improvements that you would make to the existing residential structure that's proposed to remain as the meeting and office area?
Yeah, the church, we talked about this, how to modify the front house. That will change all the roof shingles to match the proposed church building, and the outside all around, it is vinyl siding now, and we may change to a shaker siding. I mean cedar shake siding, or change to a new vinyl siding, and yeah, color to be selected, but we go towards the earth tone color.
Thank you, Mr. Howe.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions for the architect.
Any questions from members of the board? Professionals? Nobody has questions. I have one question. I know it's on plans, but how high is the building?
I think it's 32 feet.
That's to the peak?
Yeah, 30 feet.
It is 30 feet?
It's on the elevation.
I know.
Mr. Chair, Bob Euro, I believe it indicates 23 feet to the top of the roof line.
I'm talking about the church.
It's on the screen, Mr. Chairman. I think it's on the screen as we speak.
It is. It's 30 feet, right?
Right here.
And the nearby houses are going to be how high? How does this compare to the houses that are nearby? This
22.
On either side, a single story, I think. Maybe no. Actually, the one on the left is 2-story. So this will be about 7 feet higher at most from the rest surrounding houses. Is that right? Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Okay, so this, from what I'm seeing, this will probably be at most 7 feet higher than the surrounding houses. The top of this, the church is 30 feet.
Yeah, if based on the grading, that the house on the garage side, I don't know the height of that existing house on the garage side, but if that is 2-story, then and the grading slopes toward church. So if we use 30, minus 23 feet or so, so it will be about 5 to 10 feet higher.
Okay. Okay, at this point, if nobody else has questions, we'll open for public questions.
Mr. Chairman, I just need a point of clarification, if you mind. It looks like this plan was dated 12/20/2020. I believe the size of the church was revamped by Mr. Stiers. Does this current rendering reflect that change? For the size of the church, for the size of the house of worship?
Yeah, I reduced about, I don't have that number in front of me, but I think I reduced about, sorry, I cannot remember, about 800 or to 1,000 square feet.
Sure, so the plan will be, if approved, the plan will be revised to reflect to match Weber's on the site plan, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so at this point, we'll open a public question, and we'll start with Nikki Joseph. You're representing.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, we're representing a group of objectors. I'm sitting on behalf of Mr. Mensch, who usually is here. However, he had an obligation tonight. Mr. Howe, I just have a few questions for you just with regard to the just the aesthetic of the proposed project. Do you know the total square footage of the proposed project?
I have a list. I didn't prepare to put in front of me, but maybe Mr. Greg can look at it for that square footage.
I'd rather not jump around between witnesses.
Okay, so you do not know.
And Ms. Joseph, when you say project, you mean the building?
The building, correct, yes.
Let me see if you can find here. Okay, here we go. The first floor, the footprint of it is 5,865 square feet. So,
Okay.
all right.
And what's the height? I believe we said 30 feet. It was previously said.
Yeah, 30 feet to the top of the roof ridge.
Okay.
Actually, if you get to the eave, the overhang eave, that is on my drawing showing about 19 feet.
Wait, the overall height is 30 feet.
30 feet of overall height. Yeah.
And the I guess you're talking about the remaining feet in comparison to the other homes is 19. Where does that number 19 come from?
No, I'm just assuming that the two houses on each side, the height is about, all the houses around there is about 20 feet high. Or 20, yeah.
Okay, got it. That brings me to my next question. Have you done a survey or any analysis of the average height of the homes in the area?
I didn't do it, but I know that all the houses there built in the 60s, 50s, right? They're all about that height. Just for instance, like this house we're in on this side is 23 foot high as my drawing showing. It's about 23 foot high to the top of the roof ridge.
Okay, so about a 10 feet difference from that one specific home?
About 7 feet.
7 feet? Okay. And I assume you haven't done an analysis as to the square footage of the other homes in the area as well, have you?
No, yeah, I use this house on this side as a base.
And is that to the east or, let me see. Okay.
So this house over here, the existing house, is about the 1,800 square feet.
I'm sorry, repeat that again, 1,000?
For the whole thing, but the footprint is, the footprint of it, I didn't calculate that. I just figure it's like most houses around there, especially these two houses next to the lot.
Okay. And they were about, what was that number?
About 1,200 or so square feet.
Okay, got it. 1,200. So
the footprint.
So do you agree that an average home, or at least the two that you looked at, is about 3 to 4 times smaller than the proposed building?
I guess so.
Okay. And I understand that the current home that's on the lot will remain there in addition to this new building.
Yes.
Okay. With that current home, what's the use for it?
It was used as residential, but now we're using it as my drawing indicated here. Is it Mike? Would you show that the floor plan of the existing house? Yes, thank you. a little bit up. Yeah. And so this is what we're using now. If you look at the floor plan, the first floor, we're using this office, reception area, pantry, and the small office is a consultant, and the large area is a Bible study. And the second floor, mostly we use as storage.
And all of these activities will be in connection with actual church service that will occur on Sunday or the proposed few days a week that you guys will have service?
For the house itself, I understand the church will use this house as just like an office and the Bible study gathering. But during the congregation sermon, that this house is virtually empty. So all the congregation, all the people, move to the proposed chapel to attend.
And that's what you've been told by the.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, understood. And the house that's there now, is it similar in square footage and footprint and height? Is it similar to the other homes, the two homes that you compared to previously that you just compared?
Yes.
Okay.
So
the building would be substantially, I guess, taller in height and much more narrower than the homes in the surrounding area and the home that is currently on the lot.
I guess so.
Okay. Now you can move on to windows, right? The windows, what type of windows will you be putting on the new building?
I actually introduced the Anderson window.
Okay.
Yeah, Anderson 400, because they have different shapes and we can choose, and also for the durability of it.
Okay. Now, given that the building would be so much taller in height and compared to the other residential homes there, are the residents able to see the windows when they look out? Will there be lights illuminating from the windows onto the residence property?
We don't have any outside light that surround the building.
Okay.
No spotlight, no that kind of thing. And I think that should be prohibited by all the townships in New Jersey. So we have no intention to install those lights. Only a few spotlights at the entrance. We have only 2 entrances, and one escape doors that we need by code to put a door light. But that is a very minimum area to cover for the lighting. I mean, yeah.
Okay. And what's the height of the windows?
We have a very consistent windows are surrounded at the perimeter of the house, of the church. The height of the window, the highest is, let's go to the elevation. The elevation is, the highest is about 15 feet high over here. Yeah, right. If you see this 11 and then add another 5 feet or so, so it's about 16 foot high to the highest of the window.
Would a resident standing on their property be able to see the window of the new building?
If you draw a horizontal, like a geometric drawings, then the trees might block the angle toward the church window, high windows from the neighbor house.
All right, that takes me to my next topic. When you say the trees might block, why wouldn't the trees be intended to block, since they're there as a buffer?
Yeah, the buffer is like mostly for horizontal vision, but since you bring up this subject, it's, is the window going to be seen from the neighbor? I have to prove it by mechanical drawings, the existing house on 2 sides, And then the height of the tree is about 16 feet high to put a geometrical drawings to prove that this window is going to be covered by the top of the trees.
Okay, so the height of the tree will go up about 16 feet high. However, the homes you said are higher from the estimation that you did. You said about between 19 and 20.
Yes, that's
So
that's the top of the roof. But the window should be, the height should be around the say 9 feet plus 5 feet, so about the 13, 14 feet high.
But you're not 100% sure that.
Yeah.
No, but you're not 100% sure that someone is able to see it from their home looking over the tree, given that the tree only goes up to 16 feet?
You can see the roof.
Okay.
Right. I don't believe they'll see the windows.
Now, I understand the trees are smaller when they're planted. Correct? Is that correct?
Mr. Gregg has already specified that the trees that like 15, 16 foot high for evergreen or deciduous.
Is that the maximum height?
Yeah, that is, he specified, Mr. Gregg specified the height of the trees. That's how high we should plant, right? Yeah, this I'm not sure, but I think.
So the trees will never be able to reach the top of the building. They will never block it.
I'm gonna object to that question as speculative. The testimony was that the testimony from our engineer was the planting height. Obviously, trees grow a certain amount each year depending on their species. So yes, the trees are going to grow.
Right, and that's why I asked the maximum height that I guess based on his knowledge that the tree can grow up to.
Our architect doesn't do our landscape plan.
Mr. Brodnick, if the witness can't answer a question, the witness should tell us.
Mr. Howe, do you know the maximum height that the tree can grow to?
I don't know, depending on what the species.
He doesn't know.
Okay. Thank you. Now with the light poles, with the light poles, is that an area that you'd be familiar with?
You mean the parking lot lighting pole?
Yes.
Poles?
Yes.
15 feet is a very appropriate height for pretty much like a lower height for the lighting poles for parking lot like this. Most lights are about 18 foot, 19 foot high. But I think Mr. Stars already pressed down to about 15 feet. So, yeah.
Okay.
They're considered to be low.
Okay.
Right.
And I see that, will there be any spillage from the lights illuminating outside? If that makes sense.
You mean the interior light?
John Stamler, Ms. Joseph, those questions were already answered. A lot of the questions you're asking are not only on the diagram, but also they were already discussed and answered. So I don't know why you're directing your questions to Mr. Howe here when they were already answered earlier tonight and even in the prior meeting.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up a bit.
I said a lot of your questions here were already answered, not only in this meeting by earlier, but also in prior meetings. So I don't know why it's redundant that you're asking these questions all over again.
Oh, I'm just asking from an architectural perspective. If given that he designed them, I just wanted to get his perspective.
But you're asking the same question that was already answered.
Plus, he didn't design. I don't think he designed the pole lamps. He designed the building. So if you're asking about light coming out of the windows, that would be a question for him, maybe.
Okay, understood. That's why I asked him if he had any knowledge or was familiar with that before I started the line of questioning.
Yes, I already explained. The light is very low compared to other parking lots.
Thank you for the explanation. That's simply what I was trying to get out of him.
Sure. Yeah.
Any other comments? I can move forward. Okay, great. Mr. Howell, are you familiar with Class 4 dam requirements?
The what? Sorry.
Class 4 dam requirements, DAM?
I don't understand. What is that?
Oh, okay. There are certain requirements that I researched. It basically says a Class 4 dam is in New Jersey applies to any project that impounds less than 15 acre or feet of water on top of a dam. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not. I think this is for the site engineer.
Okay.
To design or to to approach.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if you had any familiarity with it. Okay, that's I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fred, at this point, would you open the line if anybody from the public not represented by Mr. Mensch?
Sure. Anybody from the public questions for the architect witness? If you do, please raise your hand at this time. I see none, Chairman.
Okay, so let's move on.
Mr. Chairman, I have, if I may, one clarification of the architect.
Excuse me, Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
It's Fred IT again. Mr. Chairman, I see Shirley's hand go up again. I don't know if it's a delay. I don't know if it takes her some time. If you want to continue, Mr. Anderson, we can pick her after. I assume she's going to want a question.
Yeah, let me get, this is just a point of clarification.
Sure.
The architect, you testified earlier that the footprint of the church itself was 5,865 feet. Is that the square footage that is shown on the plan that was displayed?
Yes.
Does that square footage match the site plan that was presented by Mr. Stiers?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, we've talked earlier that there was a change in the footprint. What we've seen tonight, what was presented tonight is the changed plan that matches the site plan. Am I correct?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'll promote Shirley so she could speak. Shirley, if you could unmute yourself again. State your name, state your name and address again for the record, please. And these, again, questions for the architect.
Shirley Marlett, Marlatt, 480 Hillsborough Road.
Thank you.
Okay, we were just wondering about the utilities to the building. I don't know if this is a place to ask it or not, but is it going to have city water, or is it going to have a well, or sewer system, or city sewers?
I think Mr. Stiers covered that, but if the architect has any information, then you can.
Mr. Howe, you muted yourself. If you're not able to answer that, just let the public person know. Thank you.
Yeah, this is showing on the Mr. Stiers site plan that shows the water from the building, proposed water from the building, from the proposed building to the street, and it's a public water and a public sewer, and also gas, all the utilities.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we're ready for your next witness, Mr. Rodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce Pastor Fred Sue. My intention is to just go over briefly the certification that we put together that talks about the specifics of the operations of the church. And then I'd like the pastor to tell us about the church, tell us how long he's been there, and just kind of give an introduction to the organization that he's involved in. So Pastor Sue, can you
just hang on a second, Mike? I just need to swear him in, all right?
Yes.
Pastor Sue, can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
All right, I just need to swear you in. If you could raise your right hand. You swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And for the record, could you state and spell your full name, please?
TSUNGSHIH is my first name. Middle name is Fred, Fred. Last name is HSU.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Sue. How long have you been a pastor?
I've been pastor. This year is my 40 years. 40 years.
And tell us a little bit about about Harvest Gospel Center.
Hello. Is my
You're frozen, but we can hear you.
Is hello? Hey.
Mr. Sue, you can keep talking. We may not see your video clearly, but you can speak. We can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. I came to this. I came to New Jersey and I studied at Rutgers University, and I got my PhD in biochemistry and microbiology. But later I changed my field. I went to the seminary, and later I became a pastor. And up to now, I have been a pastor for 40 years, and I'm really appreciated all the township board and the neighbors and so forth. You have been working very diligently and do things right. So we truly appreciate, and I really wish that we can get to know each other. I can understand all the anxieties and worries because we don't know each other. But I wish that we could have known each other much earlier, but I believe will be a blessing to the community. And so I just like to share briefly about our church. Our church is a Protestant church. It's a small church, and we use bilingual, and we have children and young people worship together with adults. And so our emphasis is not a big church. So you can understand we are a very small church. Our emphasis is that church is a family of the Lord, and it's not an institution. And so our goal is not to grow really big. We say Harvest International Center. We used to be, original name is Harvesters Gospel Center, but later we changed the name to Harvest International Center because we have a heart for the younger generation, and we also have a heart for multi-ethnic. So in God's kingdom, we are all one family. So Harvest International Center, we call it HIC. We also call it Home in Christ, HIC. And just briefly, just several minutes, I can describe to you. Before pandemic, our total number is about 70 and or 75, and we have cars, about 25 cars. We counted, we did. And then during this year of pandemic, we reduced to 25 people, sometimes even lower, and we have about 10 cars. And some other people, we worship on Zoom. And during the weekdays, Tuesday night, we have a prayer meeting of about 15 people. Wednesday, we have a young adults group. We have about 10 people. And Saturday, we have adult equipment class. It's about 10 people. And the youth, also about 10 people. So this is our size. It's quite a fairly small church. And it is a simple church. We don't plan to have school or kindergarten or any other business use. I don't think so. Yeah, and in the existing house, we will use it for offices, meeting rooms, and upstairs will be like a cabinet and a storage. It's working together with the church new building and so forth. So and that's and in terms of, I know some people ask about the sound, the noise and the sound and so forth. I believe we'll be very sensitive. And this church is not a loud church. We are very, very gentle, very, very calm. And in the past years, we have used many other buildings, and we have a wonderful relationship with all our hosts and so forth. So that's just a very quick, brief description. All right. Thank you so much.
Pastor Sue, just to tighten up on the hours of operation, is it correct that you plan Sunday worship and services from 9 a.m. to noon approximately?
I think so. Right now we are renting other church, and we have an afternoon service. When we have our own building, we can have in the morning, yes, 9 to 12.
I have no further questions.
Okay, so questions from board members?
I have one. Pastor Stu, on your website, you mentioned summer camp and concerts, community events. Would these all be held inside, or would they be outside activities? And if so, what would be the hours?
I think we seldom had any the concert. I don't think so. Maybe very occasionally, and so
Inside or outside?
should be inside. Mhm.
It will be inside. No,
Yeah,
that should be.
it'll be inside.
Okay,
Will
inside.
be. Yes.
Will be inside. Okay. And what about, summer camps for children?
Summer camp for children, if we have it, it will be short, just 1 or 2 weeks. But we will be very sensitive towards our neighbors and so forth.
Again, would
We
that
are
be,
not planning.
would there be any outside activity associated with the summer camp?
If summer camp, then children will, when they move around in the on the outside, maybe a little bit, but the mainly will be in the building.
Because of everybody, all the board engineers.
Somebody needs to mute them. Fred, you have any idea who we're hearing there?
Go ahead, Chicky. Continue, Chicky.
No, that wasn't me. I don't know who was
Right.
speaking.
So, Chicky,
Okay, one other question about your regular activities and the lighting that was a concern of neighbors. I see where you've listed some Saturday night events as going as late as 9:30. So that means the lights would be on until 10:30. Would you agree that the lights would be turned off no later than 10:30 at any time?
I think so, yes, because it won't be too late because all our people go to work tomorrow and the children go to school on Monday and so forth. Won't be too late.
Well, so you would agree that 10:30 at the latest?
Yeah, I would think so. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
Pastor-
Chairman, it's Patrick real quick. I just got a text from Fred. He dropped off at the moment. So I'm not sure if this is still recording. This live feature is still up. But I would recommend that we take a short recess to reestablish what we need to do at this point.
Okay, so we'll go away for 10 minutes. It's 8:33, 8:43. Suggest everybody mute there's video and audio before you leave your desk. Okay, we'll be back here in 10 minutes.
Sorry about the interruption.
More, yeah. But that doesn't mean it. And then all his friends were supposed to send that. But I'm saying, like, hey,
Patrick, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
All right, I'm gonna just switch for a second. Hold on. I want to see if it lets me on. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. I think it's back. Comcast is back up. I'd rather use that than the hotspot because hotspots can be flaky too.
They can be more flaky.
It was a good spot. Hey, Frank, sorry about that, Chairman.
Everybody will be back in about hopefully 4 minutes. Are we still
Yeah.
recording to YouTube?
YouTube is, YouTube is still streaming.
Okay.
And, I'll start the recording when we come back.
Yep.
So I recorded everything up to when Ms. Haynes was asking about the summer camp.
And you say recording, you mean Zoom?
Recording the meeting. We record this whole thing on Zoom, yes.
Okay, but right now it's going up to YouTube and what we're doing right now.
Right, we're still live streaming to YouTube.
Okay, so in that case, I'm gonna mute myself for another 3 minutes.
Understood.
So Fred, you're back on cable?
Yeah, hold on. Yes, I'm back on Comcast.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what happened here because all the lights flickered. So I don't know what happened outside. I don't know if it was a power thing but they dimmed a little bit but they never went out. And then next thing I know, about 3 seconds later, it froze.
Some type of surge, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I got things on protectors, but you never know.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe it's one advantage of maybe doing it from the office, but that would stink at 11 to get done here and have to come home. Again, I don't, that's why I texted you right away because I didn't think the meeting died.
No, I just checked all the panelists to see, because I check it periodically to see who's on, if anyone jumps off.
Yeah, I look at the numbers. Yeah, I look at the numbers myself. That was a good break for Michael.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask for one after this witness. That worked out great.
I felt it coming, Mike. I felt it. So I let Comcast know.
It was me. I actually
you sent the surge. I was telling Patrick my lights flickered a little, but I didn't think because that happens once in a while. But then then everything froze. I looked down, the modem was out.
The greatest thing I ever got was the Google Mesh system from Costco.
Yeah.
It's 4 different points of wireless service. So I got one in my basement, one upstairs, one in my garage, and one in my computer room. And it's the greatest thing ever. Internet is so much better. Plus they're like Alexa devices where you can just get any music or information out of them.
Yeah.
Highly recommended.
Well, what feeds your Google? Are you where's your internet come from?
Surprisingly, I'm one of because I'm out in Hunterdon County in Alexandria Township, just in Pittstown area.
Yep.
And we get Service Electric, which is hilariously the oldest cable company in the country. And I think they have the first website ever but their service is fantastic. They just upgraded it. And
really?
It's been good.
My girlfriend lives in Phillipsburg area, Low-Pat and Stewartsville, and she has Service Electric, and it's horrendous. The Lehigh Valley Service Electric.
You're streaming live on YouTube, so I don't know if you want to consider.
Well, look, it's horrendous. I called them and told them.
I mean, we got enough lawyers on here to help.
All right, I'm going to start recording again.
Okay, everybody come back on. And I'll ask Mike to take a roll call again.
No problem. I'll just wait to see some faces pop up before I start doing it.
Okay.
Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Are you requesting Mr. Stamler to show his face, Mike? There he is. No, he's not. That's Mr. Woolmacher came in.
All right. Mr. Venture. Okay. Ms. Comfer?
Here.
Mr. Stamler? I see Mr. Venture now. Ms. Lilly,
Here.
Mr. Valchek,
Here.
Mr. Woolmacher,
Here.
Vice Chair Haynes,
Here.
Chair Herbert,
Here.
and Mr. Kinsler,
I am back. Sorry, folks. Thank you.
Mr. Gorman,
Here.
Mr. Euro,
Here.
Mr. Anderson,
I'm here.
and then just Mr. Stamler.
John, you're muted. Mr. Stamler, unmute yourself if you're there. I don't hear him yet.
You say Mr. Venture is on?
There you are, Mr. Stamler.
Yeah, I thought we were on break.
Yeah, we were on break.
And you said Mr. Venture is? I don't see Mr. Venture.
I see him.
Okay.
He's there.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, as far as I can conclude that the drop-off occurred when Ms. Haynes was questioning about the outside activities, if we could just pick up from there again and go forward, just to make sure we have everything on record.
Okay, so we're questioning Mr. Shu and
Yes, Ms. Haynes, the last thing was, I think you had asked about entertainment and he said yes, inside, and then you asked about summer camp. So if you could start there, that'd be great.
Okay, I was asking, would there be summer camp and would it include any outside activities?
Mr. Sue?
You may first.
We could just read from the court reporter's notes, right?
I could do that if you guys wanted to.
There you go.
Mr. Sue is back.
Okay, I am back.
Okay.
The Wi-Fi is not stable somehow. Yeah, we are not planning to do anything big, but as a church, I think when you ask about summer camp, I think it might happen, but maybe for 1 or 2 weeks it could. But we will use, like I said, we use the indoor, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Pastor Sue, it's John Stamler. Do you plan on any daycare for the present or the future? None?
No, we
Okay.
never thought about that. Never.
Thank you. So, and I've noticed from what we discussed, this is the third meeting, that it seems like there's no activities past 9:30. So it looks like it'll be lights out at 10:30. Do you foresee,
right. Yes.
you foresee any other ceremonies or masses going past that time, or?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Most of them. I don't think so. No.
Okay, no, that's all I have. Thank you.
And as far as lights, even the interior lights, so lights not coming out of your building windows.
We will be very sensitive.
Unless there's a
We
miracle.
will be very sensitive. And the neighbors really can trust us because we are really sincere and faithful.
Pastor Sue, I have one further question about your Saturday afternoon activities that you've listed from 2 to 6 p.m. You list them as both indoor and outdoor, but with a limit of about 20 people. Is that your plan?
At this moment, Saturdays, we don't have any activities, but it's possible. But we don't have any activities Saturday. Now we have Saturday night and the other nights.
Is that Saturday night? Is that 5 p.m. to 7 p.m.?
Usually 7 p.m. to 9 p.m.
Oh, okay. Got it.
But
Yeah,
again,
we were told,
oh, I'm sorry, John. Go ahead.
for Saturday, we were told from 2 to 6, there might be some indoor, outdoor activities and about 20 cars, but that was maybe a projection.
Yeah, that's a projection. Right now, we don't have anything.
Okay. So currently there's none, but there might be some activity on Saturdays, indoor, outdoor, for about 20 cars. Okay, thank you.
Right.
Any more questions from Bob? Anything from you?
Nothing, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. So at this point, we'll open up questions and we'll take Miss Joseph first, representing some of the neighbors. Nikki Joseph?
Oh, you're muted, Miss Joseph. Oh, there
Okay,
you go.
is that better? How's that?
That's
Yeah,
good.
there you go.
Good evening, Pastor Sue. How are you doing today?
Good, good, good.
Good.
Thank you.
I just have a few follow-up questions. Why you mentioned that you guys are renting churches right now, right?
Right.
Okay. And
Yes.
where was your base church, or did you guys have one? Was this always the arrangement you had?
Right now we have at First Baptist Church of Somerset.
And prior to renting that, was that how did it work?
And we coordinate with the host church. So most of the time we are after the Sunday service, then we use in the afternoon. For example, right now we have service from 2 to 4:30. Afternoon Sunday.
It's John Stanley. I have to just ask a question. Hey, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that relevant to the application? That why does an off-site temporary church have anything to play with this application?
Well, honestly, I don't see what the connection is, but I do think that if Ms. Joseph believes that it will lead to a question, I think we need to give her at least a little bit of latitude to see where it goes.
Oh, to answer Mr. Stanley, I was just asking to see the reason why he's looking to move. That's basically the basis of it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You were muted, John.
I'm sorry?
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Joseph.
Okay, with regard to weddings, I don't know if anyone asked you any questions about that. Do you anticipate any of your members or anyone renting the church for weddings or other big social activities?
This is a small church. So 2 years ago, we had 2 weddings in using restaurants and so forth. And in 2019, we didn't have any wedding. And last year, we had 1 small wedding took place because of COVID, took place at somebody's house. So
Understood.
and we won't rent to other people for wedding and so forth, since it's a small church. The purpose, the goal is for church to be a family. It's not a business or an institution. No, we don't intend to that. I'm pretty sure.
Right, understood.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all the questions I have for now.
Thank you so much.
In that case, we'll open it up to public who are not represented by Ms. Joseph.
Okay, again, open to the public. Please state your name and address for the record, please. Spelling your last name.
This is Lisa Elwood, ELWOOD, 35 Beverly Drive.
Thank you.
Pastor Sue, it's nice to see you. We've been to a few of these meetings, so it's nice to see you in person.
Right.
So
I can see them. Good.
So I understand that you currently have a small congregation.
Yes.
You're building a church to accommodate 180 people. What I would imagine is considerable cost.
Right.
You building such a large facility for such a small church that intends to stay small.
Okay. But we do leave some room for a little bit of growth. Yes.
So growth in the number of people attending your services and growth in the number of programs that you offer your congregants and the community.
Yes, and we hope that, yes, but it won't be a humongous thing, but it's a pretty moderate.
Well, with all due respect, sir, 180 people and 60 cars is a significant change to our neighborhood. And I understand you said to trust you, but moving forward, I would imagine your church will grow and plans will change. So how can you assure the residents of this area that cars and people and lights and noise will not be a problem in the future?
Wherever we go in the past, we really are sincerely working together with the host church and also the family. And when if we are approved, and we will be, I believe we will be a blessing to the community, and we will be very sensitive. And whatever the requirement and so forth, we will accommodate and work together with the township and with the neighborhood. And I believe we will be part of the whole neighborhood. We are a family and we are part of the community. So we'll be very sensitive and careful.
Are you aware that for anybody in the neighborhood to come to your church, they would be required to walk on Hillsborough Road in the road where it would become a safety hazard? There is no sidewalk or shoulder leading to your new property.
When you say when people walk from the street to the church?
Walks anymore.
If someone from the neighborhood or if one of your congregants parked on one of the side streets, would need to walk in the road, a narrow road, a dark road that does not have a shoulder or a sidewalk in order to reach your property. Are you aware of that limitation?
I think if people want to come, they can drive to the church property. I don't think it would be better for them to drive.
So in the case of a special occasion at your church, in better times, a wedding, some other holiday gathering, if cars needed to park on side streets because your parking lot is full, and I'm concerned about the safety of pedestrians.
Right. I think safety is very important. I would rather ask church people to carpool instead of having people park along the street. That's not safe.
Ms. Elwood, any further questions? Are you still there? Okay.
I did have one other question because Pastor Sue pointed out what a good neighbor he hopes his church would be in a neighborhood like ours. But when I look at your current location on DeMont Lane in Franklin Township, that church is a large property. It is not in a residential neighborhood, is it?
It's a church property, and nearby they have residential, and across the street they have a small street mall.
I wonder what your attraction to the property is. I wonder what your
Pardon me?
attraction, I wonder what your attraction to this specific property is. Because of the size and the shape, it seems ill-suited, and it puts limits on your growth in the future. What attracts you to this property in this neighborhood?
What because we are not intended to build a big church, so we find this place and like me, living pretty close, and a lot of people live close to. This is a central location for some of the current church people. So we've been looking and we've been praying, and God led us to this place.
And just one last question, Pastor. Have you considered any other properties?
I'm gonna object
Any
to
other
that
properties?
question. I'm gonna object to that question.
What's the basis for the objection?
It's a conditional use. It's a permitted use in the zone.
I don't think that has anything to do with the question. We all know it's a conditionally permitted use. I don't see that.
I don't see what the relevance is, but
I think I
go
have.
ahead.
I think, as with many things, the board may or may not feel it's relevant, but I think it's appropriate to let the question be asked.
Okay.
Hey, Sue, could you ask that question, Ms. Owen?
Yes, thank you. Pastor, I was just asking if you considered for your future site any other properties. This property seems rather unique, being in a residential neighborhood with neighbors living within feet of your property.
Well, let's not put a lot of conditions on the question. You know, those are, the pastor may or may not agree with that, but the simple question is of whether he or his church is considered another property. Any other property, I think, is a reasonable one to ask and to be answered.
Say it again, because my Wi-Fi had a problem. So,
Mark,
Pastor, the question, as I understood it, at least I think the question that's appropriate to ask, have you or your church considered any other property for the construction of a permanent church?
no.
That I'm sorry.
We did, but now, well, we searched. Yeah.
Okay.
The answer is no.
So your answer is you did not consider any other property. You looked for others, but you never
All
considered.
right, no.
Okay.
No.
That's all my questions. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you.
I see we have one more hand up there, friend.
Yep. Ms. Gulliford, please state your name and address for record, spelling your last name, please. Thank you.
Susan Gulliford, Hunt Club Road, Gulliford.
Thank you.
By the way, I also had the same computer problem you did, but my computer came back up. So I'm not sure if I might have missed some of the pastor's introduction to his congregation. And also my question is possibly similar to what Miss Elwood just asked. I wasn't familiar with the pastor's church, so I was looking it up this week, and it seemed like it might have been headquartered in Piscataway in Middlesex County, although he has mentioned now Franklin Township. So I guess my question was, I'm not sure if this is similar to Miss Elwood. How did they choose Hillsborough? Are there congregants from Hillsborough? Are they going to be traveling in from other areas? I'm just kind of lost as to why Hillsborough was chosen for the congregation. If Mr. Anderson thinks I can ask that.
Yeah, it was already asked, Susan, but you can ask it.
Thank you.
We have some people living Hillsborough, and also Hillsborough is more central for the current church people. And so that's I think that's the main reason.
So currently your congregation is traveling from this area over to, where are you now? Franklin Township.
Yeah, some are from Hillsborough, And now we are renting the church in Franklin Township, Somerset. Yes,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any more friends? No?
I don't see anybody else for this witness, please.
Okay,
I see none.
Mr. Ogrodnik.
Okay, our final witness is Christine Cafone. She's our professional planner. And I would ask that she give her professional experience, her licensing, and go over the variance, relief, waivers, and necessitated by this application.
Hi, Christine, I'll swear you in. Do you swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And for the record, could you just state and spell your name, please?
Certainly. It's Christine Nazaro Cafone. It's Nazzaro. Cafone is C-O, F as in Frank, O-N-E.
Thank you.
Business address is 125 Half Mile Road, Suite 200, Red Bank, New Jersey, 07701. So good evening, testifying this evening as a professional planner. I am licensed and practicing for 25 years in the state of New Jersey. As such, I've been qualified in Hillsborough and in excess of 420 other planning and zoning boards throughout the state of New Jersey. I teach planning and zoning courses for the Rutgers Center for Government Services, as well as an adjunct instructor at Monmouth University, teaching special topics.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Ms. Cafone, can you go over the variance relief necessitated by this application?
Yes, we are here seeking a D3 variance for 2 unmet conditional use standards, as the subject property is located in the R zone, which conditionally permits churches. They are subject to about 6 conditions, and we violate 2 of the conditions. The 2 conditions that we violate require us to seek a D3 variance from the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So that's the only variances that we're seeking. I concur with Mr. Maskey in his March 2nd, 2021 supplemental review that he issued on this, that because the parsonage is no longer part of the application, we do not need to seek a D1 variance. So it's a really important distinction, because the burden of proof that I have to testify to as a professional planner is quite different with a D3 variance than a D1 variance. The reconciliation that we need to go through in accordance with the Coventry Square proofs is that, absent compliant with the conditional use standards, does this still remain an appropriate location for the proposed use? So I'll talk about that specifically with regard to the 2 deviations that we have for the conditional use standards. In addition to that, we need 3 waivers for this application. They are also identified in Mr. Maskey's March 2nd, 2021 review letter, and they are for our buffer on our eastern property line. We have a buffer of 13 feet where 30 feet is required, and that is simply, and you'll see that that's been a revision in the plans, that we weren't originally seeking that, but in order to accommodate the fire marshal's request that is, not requirement, that we have a secondary means of access, we are now requesting to have that fire access in the buffer area. Now, I think it's important to note that, again, that it is a request by the fire marshal and not a requirement, and this is a sprinklered building. However, we have redesigned our plans to provide that secondary means of access, and I'll provide some justification for that as well. The other 2 waivers that we're seeking in conjunction with this application are for the drive aisles of 24 versus 30 feet. We're proposing 24, where your ordinance requires 30. And then also for the parking space size, where your ordinance requires 10 by 20, we're proposing 9 by 18. Those are 3 waivers that are associated with this application. And that's it. In all other aspects, this use complies with the zoning requirements for setbacks and the criteria that are applied to it. So when you talk about the D3, and I'll get right into that, the conditional use standards, I think it's extremely important to recognize that in the R zone, this conditional use standards specifically allow for churches, nursery schools, public and private schools, and childcare centers. Then it goes on in the ordinance from section 8 on section A through H there to identify that the minimum lot area is 2 acres. We certainly comply with that at 5.1 acres. The minimum lot width of 200 feet, that is one of our departures from the conditional use standards. The subject property is 195 feet in width with no way to cure that. The property to our east is non-conforming. According to the tax maps, that lot also has a non-conforming width of 185 feet. The lot to the east is 195.79, and the lot to the west is 185 feet. So there's no ability for us to cure that, that deficiency and grab a little bit of more land because we wouldn't be able to comply. And that's an existing condition. Whether this application is approved or not, we will not meet that we would not be able to meet that 200-foot requirement. Then there's also a lot depth requirement of 200 feet. We comply with that. A minimum front yard setback of 100 feet. We comply with that. A minimum side yard setback of 50 feet, which we comply with, and a rear yard setback of 75 feet, which we certainly more than comply with. There's then a building height of 35 feet. We comply with that. The impervious coverage in the conditional use standards refers you back to the underlying zone. So when you're dealing with the impervious coverage, you refer back to the underlying R standards, which require 15%. We're at 15.87%. So over, but just slightly. And I think when you consider the fact that we are proposing a roadway dedication for roadway widening purposes, that we would actually comply with the coverage prior to that dedication. And I know Mr. Stiers testified to the those numbers when he testified, I believe it was 2 hearings ago. But I think that it's very important to consider that we are proposing a dedication on this property, which certainly contributes less area for us to count that coverage or to calculate our building coverage, thereby contributing to the variance relief. So that's the reconciliation. Despite the fact that we don't comply with that lot width by 5 feet, and we have a lot that's 5.1 acres where 2 acres is required, and we exceed the impervious coverage, what the board is left to reconcile is, absent compliance with those 2 conditional use standards, is this still an appropriate location for the use? Respectfully, I don't think what's before the board is a church or a house of worship appropriate at this location? Because legislatively, your governing body did that when they introduced it into this, as well as every other residential district, as a conditional use. Moreover, when you look at the stated purpose of the RA, RS, R1, R2, CRAH, RCA, PD, and R8A residential districts, it talks specifically, and I'm going to read from section 188-98 of your ordinance here in Hillsborough, which reads, the purpose of all of those aforementioned districts is to establish a distribution of population density throughout the township in relation to existing and prospective facilities, a convenient street system, employment areas, and reasonable predictability of population growth. So after it talks about population density throughout the township in relation to existing and prospective facilities. So clearly the purpose of the RA zone contemplated not only having residential uses, but also facilities proximate to them. So in no way can I conclude from a planning point of view that the zone did not envision for there to be churches and houses of worship and schools and the like situated proximate to residential uses. With that being said, we have a burden of proof when we are dealing with the Coventry use standards. We have to demonstrate, of course, that absence compliance with the conditional use standards, it still remains an appropriate location. But we also have to demonstrate, does the use further the purposes of the municipal land use law? The purposes of the municipal land use law are found at section 40:55D-2 of the land use law. In order to substantiate our burden of proof, we have to advance only one of those criteria. I believe that there are several of them identified, and in the land use law, they are identified by letter and not number, and they're certainly not unique to Hillsborough. They would apply to anybody seeking a D variance or a D3 variance in the state of New Jersey. Criteria A talks about promoting the general welfare. houses of worship have undoubtedly been found to be inherently beneficial uses. So if we weren't a conditionally permitted use in the zone and we had to go the way of the traditional D1 variance, where planners will come to you when you have a use that's not permitted in the zone and talk about particular suitability and an enhanced reconciliation of the omission of the use from the zone plan, you would hear that kind of testimony. You wouldn't hear that kind of testimony on an inherently beneficial use because they presumptively satisfy the positive criteria. Given the fact that this is an inherently beneficial use and it's conditionally permitted in the zone, I think it would be appropriate for the board to find that criteria A, which promotes the general welfare, would be advanced given the fact that this is an inherently beneficial use. But in addition to criteria A, I think the board can also rely on criteria G, which talks about sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of uses. I think the board can rely on H, which talks about promoting the free flow of traffic. You heard testimony last time we were together by our traffic engineer, Gary Dean, who talked about not only the fact that this would have less of an impact than some other as of right uses in the R zone, as well as specifically less impact on the peak hour, he also provided further testimony that when this use peaks, it's typically on Saturday or Sunday when the other traffic in the area would not be peaking. So I think that that's an important consideration that allows us to also rely on criteria H. Criteria I talks about a desirable visual environment. Mr. Howe went through his plans very carefully earlier this evening to talk about the things that he has done to bring down the massing of the structure and the architecture of the structure. Also, I think with us keeping the residential home that already exists on the property, that will do quite a bit to preserve the frontage and the streetscape of the property along Hillsborough Road, which will still appear residential in character given the retention of that structure. So I think the board can certainly rely on criteria I and also criteria M. Criteria M talks about allowing for efficient use of the land and avoiding urban sprawl and degradation of the environment. In this particular instance, I see absolutely no reason for the applicant to go to a 10 by 20 parking stall where 9 by 18 is perfectly serviceable for this use. This is not a retail use where people are going to be bringing goods and bags into and out of their vehicles. It's not a use where you have frequent and high turnover of traffic trips. And also, I think when you look at the access drive aisles, as I'm not sure if Mr. Dean testified in one of our prep meetings or at the hearing last month, but 30 feet is larger than some roads. So there's simply just really no planning reason to have those drive aisles be 30 feet on the subject property. 24 feet is more than sufficient for us to safely maneuver our traffic throughout the site. That was Mr. Dean's uncontroverted testimony from a traffic point of view in the record last month. So those are the positive criteria that I think the board can rely on. Again, in order to substantiate our burden of proof, we only need to justify one of them. So if you find that one is not persuasive, or you're more persuaded by one more than the others, in order for us to substantiate our burden of proof for the grant of the variance, we need only advance one of those. I cited 5: criteria A, criteria G, criteria H, criteria I, and criteria M. The next burden of proof that we're left to reconcile when you're dealing with the variance, a D3 variance, is does the proposal substantially impair the purpose and intent of the zone plan and the zoning ordinance? Now, I remind us all that the land use law does not require you hold us or any other applicant to such a standard that there be no detriment, just that the benefit of the grant of the variance outweigh any detriment. And I think that there are a couple of considerations in the negative criteria in conjunction with this application. I think that the applicant has made several proffers this evening as to reasonable conditions that they would accept to mitigate any impacts. We talked about the ability to, in addition to the plantings that we're proposing, to propose a fence to screen our property neighbors. I believe it was talked about 4 to 6 feet. I think we landed on 4, but I'm not sure that we circled back on that. To shut our lights off 1 hour after our last service, which albeit ends around 9 o'clock. So not a terribly late or noxious use to any of our neighbors. So I think when you come and you look at the impact on the zone plan and the substantial detriment, and this, again, you look at the stated purpose of that R zone. I think that that's very important for the board to consider, is that the very purpose of this zone contemplates existing and prospective facilities located proximate to residential uses. I would liken this application to be really no different in proximity than the Woods Road Elementary School, which is just 0.3 miles down the road to our east, where you have a number of homes on both Beverly Drive and Ardsley Road that are adjacent to either the school buildings or the parking lot. So I see no reason why we can't develop this property similarly. And based on my observation and my view, my field visit to that school, I think our proposed church facility would actually have a much greater separation to our residential neighbors. Also, as far as the negative criteria, Mr. Stiers did some review as to the properties that surround the property, our property, the subject property, and what their coverages would be. And the coverages came out to about 15.9% with pools, which is just slightly higher than us, without pools, I'm sorry. And then about 17.80% coverage with pools. So to come to the conclusion that there's going to be a substantial detriment on the subject property due to the grant of the variance or any of the excess coverage from a planning point of view, I simply just can't get there. So I do believe that statutorily we can substantiate our burden of proof with respect to the negative criteria, which requires that the benefits outweigh any detriments and that the detriments be mitigated. And I think that we're certainly, with the imposition of reasonable conditions, able to mitigate any detriments that the neighbors might perceive on our application. The public good at the substantial detriment to the zone plan and to the public good. The last thing I will say is that in the master plan for Hillsborough, the 2008 master plan, the 2018 master plan re-examination report references earlier objectives and plans in earlier plans with respect to community facilities, which talks about programming and planning for the expansion of necessary public services and community facilities. And of course, in your community facilities element, you consider quasi-public uses such as churches and house of worships in your community facilities. And I think it's important to recognize that the master plan does talk about programming and planning for the expansion of these facilities in your community. So I do think that this is certainly consistent with your master plan, consistent with the R zoning for the area. And I think the variance relief can be granted with no substantial detriment to the zone plan or the public good. I think there are a number of reasonable conditions that can be imposed on this application to mitigate any of the perceived negative impacts to the subject property. And I see absolutely no reason why the waivers for the smaller parking size and the drive aisles shouldn't be granted. I think it's certainly from a planning point of view, there is no reason to have that additional impervious coverage if it's just not necessary or warranted by the use on the property. And I think the board, and again, those are waivers, they're not variances. So I think that that's also a distinction that the board can consider. So with that being said, I have nothing further on direct. Mr. Ogrodnik, if there's something I missed, by all means, please let me know and I'll be happy to go back and address it. If you just bear with me here, I'm looking through my notes for a minute. Oh, I guess when I was talking about the inherently beneficial use, I should have also have testified to the fact that this use is also protective under the Religious and Incarcerated Persons Act. So certainly this is the type of use that is considered a protective and different type of use in land use law than some of the other straight D1 non-inherently beneficial uses that come before the board. There are certainly a different level of proofs associated with this. So with that being said, I don't have anything further on direct, Mr. Ogrodnik, unless there's something that you think I missed or would like me to go back over.
I don't think there's any questions that I would have, and we would ask the chairman to open it up to the board.
Okay. Questions from the board?
Yeah, Mr. Grodnick, first, a quick one to you. What was the proposed setback from the rear boundary line for the environmental conservation easement that was mentioned at the last meeting?
No, I don't recall. Let me check the site plan real quick.
Yeah, I couldn't find it. It was several hundred feet.
Yes.
Whatever it is, we'd expect them to meet that, correct?
Well, what my question to the planner was going, but that's why I wanted the specific distance. Does Mr. Stiers have that
I
available?
was just going to suggest that, Ms. Haynes, maybe, I believe Mr. Stiers is still on. I agree with you. I'm looking at the site plan right now, but I have only a small copy
Well,
of it.
my
I can't read
question
it.
to you was, because I believe it was several hundred feet at least, would that act as an adequate buffer for any of the neighbors to the south of this property?
It certainly would, and I think it's an excellent point. When you look at the fact that the zoning standards for this use in this R zoning district require a minimum rear yard of 75 feet. So say, for example, we had a site that wasn't encumbered by wetlands, we could push this building back to be 75 feet from our rear property line and still comply with what your zoning ordinance envisions.
Can you explain to anybody that might be listening exactly what kind of a protection does an environmental conservation easement give those neighbors in the back?
The protection is that you can't touch it. So we can't come back, and then if harvesters were to expand or want to expand at some point, they can't expand there because it is now a protected land that is restricted from any further development.
And that would be written into a deed? It would be a deed restriction, or?
That question I will defer to our attorney as to exactly the legal mechanism or legal instrument to accomplish that. Mr.
Yes,
O'Bradick is shaking his head
correct.
yes. So
Yeah,
to answer your question, yes.
We would
Okay.
provide a conservation easement, and Mr. Stiers would designate a legal description of that area as
Do
previous.
we have a number yet?
I mean, it's hundreds of feet.
Well,
I defer to Mr. Stiers.
600 feet.
600, okay, I thought it was quite a few. Okay, so there'd be 600 feet of absolute no activity back there. And that
That's
includes
correct.
cutting, does that include cutting down trees or things of that sort, clearing the land?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anybody else have questions?
No, Mr. Nazario, a very good presentation. I think he covered everything.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just one question from a planning perspective. Mr. Grodnick, you touched in the beginning of your testimony about Mr. Maskey's view of the front building, the former residential building, as being a part of this house of worship. I think your planner needs to at least comment on that aspect at the same time.
Certainly, I'm happy to do that. So in Mr. Maskey's March 2nd, 2021 report, he indicates that now that the parsonage is no longer part of the proposal, the D1 variants for more than one principal use on the site or in a building are no longer needed. So if you had an opportunity to review the floor plans and elevations for Harvest Gospel Center, you will see in the upper left-hand corner of that architectural plan, there was plans for the existing residential dwelling and what will go on and how that will be programmed. And it is clearly for the offices for the pastor, for the existent pastor, and for some very minor meeting rooms. So these are things that are clearly accessory to the use of the property as a house of worship. It's no different than if you had a single family home on your property and you had a shed to store your garden tools, or you had a detached garage to store your vehicle. You would certainly have more than one principal use on or more than one structure on your property, but they're all under the umbrella of the residential use. That is how this is going to function. So I completely concur with Mr. Maskey. Now, if we were going to use that to operate some type of school or something like that, then I think perhaps, although those uses are ancillary to a church, a school would be. I think if you were to use it for something not related to the harvester's application, then I think you could certainly make an argument. But where you have uses that are completely under the umbrella of the church, it's absolutely part and parcel to the principal use on the subject property.
To go a little bit further, this wouldn't be in conflict to Ordinance 188-74, which states that you can't have two principal uses or two principal structures on the property in a residential zone.
No, because again, it's an accessory use. It's not a principal use. It's not as if we're subletting it to somebody else, or you're going to have two different businesses there, or you're going to have completely different activities in that residential building. This building is subordinate to the principal use, which is a church. All of the activities that will occur in that building will be subordinate to the use of a church. So it is not a second principal building. It is an accessory structure that is accessory to the principal use as a house of worship.
So going back to the ordinance for the R zone under section 188-98C, number 2, it says accessory uses are allowed in all yards but the front yard, except provided in this 188-66D. 188-66D goes into non-conforming structures, uses, and the such. There's no, in your opinion, is there a conflict or not conflict with this ordinance?
It is not a conflict. We meet the setbacks for the front yard.
Patrick, you already knew that, right?
Of course it did, but it's.
Yeah, so why are we going through this?
Wants to answer this question, witness.
The question is that if they're considering this an accessory structure, C2 states accessory uses are allowed in all yards but the front yard.
This is Phil Sully. I have a question for Christine.
Let me suggest, if I'm sorry to interrupt you, Sully, but I do think this is an important question. Maybe I don't understand it completely, but I believe the question is, I believe that Ms. Cafone has indicated this is an accessory building, and Mr. Gorman is pointing out that accessory structures are not permitted in the front yard.
Accessory uses.
Do I grasp the question you're asking, Mr. Gorman?
Correct, but I think what the applicants propose that this is not an accessory use.
Well, but it is an accessory building.
But it's not in the front yard. It's not in the front yard. It's outside of the front yard setback.
It may be out of the front yard setback, but it's still in the front yard.
I'm not sure that that may be a distinction without a difference. The ordinance reads that accessory uses are allowed in all yards but the front yard. So this is not part of the front yard setback.
Well, but you're simply repeating it as if it were true. I don't know that it is, and part of my concern is that I don't believe the applicant is noticed for a front yard variance.
Because we're not seeking a front yard variance. The structures comply with the setback requirements.
Yeah, no, I have no doubt I understand your position. I'm not sure that that I see that it's correct, but I understand your testimony.
Thank you.
Mr. Anderson, I think with the testimony that was provided, that was stated that this building, Ms. Crawford, I don't want to put words in your mouth, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is a use that is connected to the overall campus or the overall church at this point, and this is not an accessory structure.
It's all one principal use. So it's not a second principal use on the lot. These are all things that fall under the umbrella of the church. So
again, I have no difficulty with that conclusion. My question is as to an accessory structure. I mean, Ms. Cavone, you referred earlier to it's just like if you had a garage. Well, you're not allowed to put the garage in front of the house in the R zone. At least that's my understanding.
I was from Mr. Anderson, I was liking it to a use is that if you have if you have a residential home and you have a garage on it, that doesn't mean you have two uses. It's all part of the umbrella. I said, if you keep your garden tools in there, that all falls under the umbrella of the residential use.
I understand, but you're answering a question with respect to use, not with respect to structure.
I stand by my testimony. It's not located it complies with all of the setbacks. So I don't think that there's any issue with respect to the location of the building. I don't think it requires any variance relief.
Okay, certainly I understand your testimony clearly.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, the question I had was, is Pastor Shu going to live on the property or in the accessory building at all, or any of the assistant pastor?
No.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Ms. Cafone, you do understand the concern and even possible alarm of the nearby neighbors having this big change on the property? You know, and one thing I'd point out, you compare it to Rhodes School, but you know, the school was there first. Those houses came after the school. This is just the opposite. So, you know, they've been there a long time, and all of a sudden this big structure is being put there. So.
Of course we understand their concern, Mr. Herbert. Anytime there's change in a neighborhood, you have to expect that there's going to be concern. And I think Pastor Hugh tried to, let the residents know, we want to be a good neighbor. We're willing to put a fence up. We're willing to shut the lights off. We don't want to come in here and make anybody unhappy with the use that we're proposing. I think that there's a lot of things that the applicant has agreed to do because we are sensitive to those things. And we do appreciate that these are people's homes, and we don't want to bring a use that's going to disrupt the peaceful, quiet enjoyment of somebody's home. I don't think that that's what Harvester's mission is about at all. And I think that they'd be certainly willing to accept any reasonable conditions to ensure that doesn't happen. I think as an applicant, they're certainly sensitive to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, at this point, everybody's asked questions. We'll turn it over to public, and first of all, Ms. Joseph, turn it over to you.
I see Mr. Mon. I'm not sure how you say his name, Chairman Herbert, but I think the other attorney is in. Mr. Joseph.
Okay, if he's willing, is he going to bring him in?
He's raising his hand, so I'm gonna bring him in as a panelist so he could speak.
Yeah.
Mr. Munch, are you there?
I believe I'm here. Can
okay. Yeah, there you are.
Oh, thank you. Good evening to the board. I appreciate your courtesies to Ms. Joseph. Hopefully you were kind to her in the earlier questioning, and I apologize for being joining us late tonight. I do obviously have questions for this witness. As a preliminary matter, Mr. Anderson, I will obviously ask questions of the planner. I don't know when the appropriate time, I think probably maybe towards the end in closing remarks. I have a differing opinion on it as a matter of law with the interpretation of accessory uses and what's permitted under the Shim case. And, we've had some kind of informal discussion about it. I just want to put on the record right now that it's our position as a matter of law that when there is a conditional use, which is different than an outright approved use. It's conditional only if the conditions are met. Here it's not. And therefore accessory structures are not automatically permitted as a result. So I don't believe accessory structures are permitted at all without the appropriate D variances that go with it. Beyond that point, just for the record now, I also disagree with the idea that the uses are the same. They're not, they may be accessory uses, related uses. They're not the same uses. And if we were to take the applicant's argument to its conclusion that it is an accessory structure, certainly at some point in time here or in the future, we would argue that no waiver, no variance was requested, and that no such variant relief can be granted. I put on the record now, I assume at closing or at whatever point in time Mr. Anderson directs, I'm sure that Mr. Ogronik disagrees with me and wants to probably have a fuller discussion on the issue, but since there was discussion, I wanted to put that on the record.
I do think it makes sense for you to have done that, and I appreciate they've been upfront with the board and with the witness as to your position. My feeling, at least at the moment, is that this is something that the board might want, or more specifically, that I might want in order to advise the board some written position from the two attorneys. But I think it's a little premature to make that request.
Yeah, I agree, Mr. Anderson. I think that's probably what makes sense. It's kind of a very nuanced technical issue that I assume that really would be beneficial to have something in writing on, in the cases and the statutes and everything else. But I don't want to belabor the point now. I just want to make sure it was raised for the record on this. And with that, I will proceed with questioning the witness, if that's okay with Mr. Anderson and Mr. Herbert.
That's up to Mr. Herbert, but it's certainly okay with me.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mrs. Aro-Kaflon. I'm going to go back over your testimony a little bit and ask you some more specific questions. And I apologize, you went a little fast for me. I tried to take notes, so I apologize if it sounds like I'm asking you to repeat some of it, but I just want to make sure that that we're clear on some of the topics. You had mentioned at one point impervious coverage as I believe you were comparing it to other properties. Is that correct?
Yes, and good evening, Mr. Mensch. I didn't want to interrupt you. So yes, Mr. Stiers, our engineer, did an analysis of the lots that were in the area contiguous to our subject property. And his findings were that looking at lots that did not have a pool, that the average lot coverage was 15.90%. Looking at those lots that in fact did have a pool, he came up with an average coverage of 17.80%, okay, all of which exceed the 15% that we are being held to.
Okay. Did you do any analysis yourself with regard to those numbers?
No.
Do you know the scope of the properties that were included in that analysis?
I asked him that, and he said it was all of the properties that were contiguous to our property, that touched our property. So anything that was surrounding our property.
Okay. Do you know when those properties were built?
I don't.
Do you
some
know-
of the homes look newer, some of them look quite a bit older. So I don't know exactly when they were built.
Okay. Do you know what the zoning was at the time those properties were built?
No.
To your knowledge, are the properties that were included in that, are they all residential houses?
Yes, they are. All single family residential to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. So no other commercial type properties or any uses other than residential in that pool of properties that you just described?
Correct.
For that same grouping of properties, do you have any knowledge as to the square footage of the homes in those properties?
I do not.
Do you have any idea as to the general size? I'll say size, not a good number, not a good word. The general height of the houses in those neighborhoods?
They look to be in conformance with the zoning requirements of 35 feet. They certainly all look to comply, as does our structure.
And do you have any knowledge as to whether any of those properties have, or how many of those properties have more than one structure on them?
I don't. If they have, and when you say by more than one structure, are you talking about a shed or
anything? Could be a shed or any other structure.
I don't.
Okay. Is, to your knowledge, when we look at the area surrounding the subject property, so then I'm correct that as far as you're aware, there's no other non-residential uses and there's no other uses with more than one structure on them in that area?
Other than the school that I testified to, which is 0.3 miles from the site, the area is predominantly is really all detached single family homes, which look to be, 2.5 story homes.
Okay. The use in question here at church is a conditionally approved use, which, as I understand it, means that it's only permitted if the conditions are met, correct?
It's treated as a permitted use if we meet all of the conditions. If we don't, then we have to seek the D3 for the unmet conditional use standards.
Correct. So here, this is not a permitted use.
It's a conditionally permitted use. We violate 2 of the conditions.
Right. Okay. You had said that it was permitted if you meet the conditions. So here you don't meet the conditions. So it's not permitted.
That's why we're at the zoning board.
Okay. So in this instance, we have the condition of the size of the property, the width, which obviously as you testify to, you can't change. This is a very long and narrow property, correct?
It is long. It far exceeds the depth and it exceeds the area as well.
Right. With regard to the area where the property is being developed, have you done the conservation easement amounts to how much of the property, do you know?
I would have to defer that question to Mr. Stiers.
But I'm correct that all the development is concentrated in the half closest, or I don't know if it's half, but the portion of the property closest to the road, correct?
Yes, I believe Ms. Solelli asked earlier in the evening how far we were from the back of the property to the conservation easement, and it was over 600 feet. So yes, which forces the development further up on the property given those constraints.
Right. So while the property may have the total property may have an impervious coverage of 15.8, I believe, 0.87.
Yes.
The front portion of the property is where all of that impervious coverage is concentrated.
Really the front to the center, because the front of the property, yes, we'll have some development, and it is developed and disturbed today, but I would consider it more like the center, the front and center of the property.
Right. Now, with the 2 conditions you don't met, property width, obviously, again, you can't, it's not in your control. With impervious coverage, the applicant could meet impervious coverage if they decrease the size of the project, correct?
Absolutely. Yes, they could meet it if they had to.
Which would probably, am I correct that if you could eliminate parking spaces, but obviously you need enough parking for the church, so it's probably all related, where if you decrease the size of the church, you can decrease the number of parking spaces needed and therefore potentially comply with the impervious coverage, correct?
Correct. You could decrease the size of the facility, but as you heard from our traffic engineer, Gary Dean, this is not, even at 180 seats, we're not going to have a substantial impact to the adjoining roadway system. We certainly have the ability to meet all of the setbacks. So, other than, simply meeting that numerical coverage number, I'm not sure that there's really any benefit to be gained by reducing the size of the church.
I would presume that if you reduce the size of the church, that the structure would then be smaller. Correct?
Yes, I would think so.
Right. So if you're a neighbor next door, you're looking at a slightly less big building, correct?
A slightly less big building. I don't know that I would agree, and we'll have to agree to disagree on the characterization of the terms.
The building would be smaller.
I would agree the building would be smaller. Yes.
Fair enough. Similarly, if you had a smaller building, you're going to have less cars because the building can hold less people. So even at the maximum capacity, it's going to be less cars, correct?
Yes.
If I could ask you, you were going through some of the various criteria on the positive side in support that the board rely upon in support of approving this application. And I tried jotting them down, but I'm going to ask you just to go over, make sure I didn't miss any. The first one, which I believe was A, you mentioned, was that it promotes the public good. Is that correct?
Promotes the general welfare because it's an inherently beneficial use. So I think it's appropriate with an inherently beneficial use, even though, like I said, we're not a D1, so we don't have to demonstrate site suitability. And even if we were not a conditionally permitted use and had to deal with a D1 use variance on an inherently beneficial use, it presumptively satisfies the positive criteria. So I thought that reliance on criteria A is appropriate in that circumstance.
In that instance, that's essentially, I'll say it's kind of circular, but we're basically saying that just because it is what it is, it automatically meets the inherently beneficial criterion A. Is that correct?
And that's not my interpretation. It is an inherently beneficial, under the case law. So when you have an inherently beneficial use, you presumptively satisfy the positive criteria.
Is it your opinion or testimony that that's true even when the use is a conditionally permitted approved use?
I would think even if it were non-permitted at all, that would be true. If you were dealing with a straight D1 where the use wasn't permitted either conditionally or in any way, you would be dealing with an inherently beneficial use that presumptively satisfies the positive criteria.
And I guess, maybe Mr. O'Gronick and I will argue about this later, but you're arguing that in this instance, that's automatically covered here.
Yes.
Okay. What was the second criteria? Was it B that you mentioned?
No, it was criteria G.
G.
As in girl,
Yep.
which talks about sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of uses. And I talked about how the underlying conditional use standards require 2 acres and our site is 5.1 acres. So there's certainly sufficient space for this type of use.
So, but despite that, it's big enough acreage. In this instance, the property is both undersized from a width standpoint and is not large enough to accommodate the impervious coverage of the application, correct?
It is undersized by 5 feet, which to me is de minimis. And it is large enough to accommodate the impervious coverage prior to our roadway dedication. So when we do that roadway dedication for road widening purposes, we are no longer large enough to accommodate the coverage.
Right. And the road dedication is to accommodate all the traffic that the application is going to bring, correct?
I don't think so. I think it's a road widening, so I don't think that it's to accommodate all the traffic. I think Mr. Dean's testimony was very clear that there are uses that are allowed as of right in the zone that would have more of an impact on the traffic. So I don't think that we can make that connectivity there.
Well, I guess one of there was a lot of discussion at the last meeting with regard to traffic and sight lines. And I guess maybe I was mistaken, but I thought that part of the idea of the road widening dedication was to allow for additional room and lanes for cars to, pull over to make that turn into the church facility. That it wasn't just a road widening for no reason. It was to accommodate cars who were pulling in or leaving the site. Is that not the purpose of the road dedication and widening?
I think that that's part of it. I think really that question would probably have been better directed to Gary Dean as to the exact intent of that widening. But from a planning point of view and the impacts of the lot size, we would comply with the lot coverage absent that dedication area.
Right. And I guess it just strikes me as somewhat circular because later on is another criteria here that talks about, you talk about traffic, and we'll get to that in a second. But if, again, it seems like you're saying, well, you would comply for the previous coverage, but we're doing this road dedication. And at some point we go back and check the transcripts, but I'm pretty sure Mr. Dean testified that we're providing the road dedication because we need to accommodate the traffic and make it easier for people to turn in and out of the property. So therefore, if we didn't have the road dedication, then we wouldn't be able to accommodate, we wouldn't be making those improvements for traffic purposes.
I'm going to place an objection on the record. That's mischaracterizing the testimony of the prior witnesses, specifically of Mr. Stiers. He had introduced the site plan in the first meeting, and I'm paraphrasing, indicated that he felt since all of the other roadways, not many of the other properties along the roadway had dedicated the additional width to the roadway, that it would be an appropriate planning goal and it would be consistent with the neighborhood. So I would object to that because that's not what the testimony was.
I won't argue, Mr. O'Gronick. I think the point I'm making, which I think is made, is simply that the board would potentially, based on planner's testimony, would have to either choose, arguably comply with impervious coverage and give up whatever benefits accompany the road widening, or have the road widening and include the impervious coverage. I'll leave it at that for now. And again, we can argue about the ultimate merits of the case at the end. After item G, it was H, is that correct? Or I?
Yes. Well, after item G was H and then I, which is
Okay.
I is a desirable visual environment.
Okay. H was the traffic, correct?
Correct. And
And
then I,
right. And so traffic, you're saying that this application promotes the free flow of traffic?
yes, and that it would have less traffic, as Mr. Dean testified, that it has less traffic than some other permitted uses, and certainly that the major impact is on the Sunday morning, which was the lightest traffic times of the adjoining roadways. So certainly in a zone where the schools would be conditionally allowed here, this is certainly not, from a traffic point of view, going to have a substantial detriment or negative impact to the area.
Is it your opinion that when looking at promoting free flow of traffic, that the board should be considering a hypothetical non-approved use as opposed to the difference in traffic that is being proposed from what's there then now to what's going to be there after the application is built?
Most definitely. While I'm not a traffic engineer and I don't prepare traffic impact statements, I read them all the time. And there's a reason why the planner's testimony typically follows the traffic engineer's testimony. And I can tell you one of the typical things we see in the traffic engineering statements, that impact statements that I review, is a comparison to other uses. So I would say in my 25 years of practicing and thousands of appearances before boards, I would say it's fairly common practice. Again, I'm not a traffic engineer. I don't prepare these statements, but I review them in my capacity as the planner who testifies on the project. I would say that that is a typical and reasonable comparison.
As the planner commenting on the impacts of the application in the neighborhood, have you reviewed any traffic studies that discuss the current traffic generation from any of the other properties, contiguous properties in the area?
I don't understand the question. Is that
do
single family homes or the school?
Sure, yeah. So right now, this is a single family home, and I'm asking, there's a certain amount of traffic that Mr. Dean has testified that will come to and from this property. And I'm asking you as a planner, have you compared how that traffic pattern at this site compares to any of the other properties in the area, and what that will or won't do to the character of the neighborhood?
I think that Mr. Dean testified to that.
Okay. So you have not done any analysis on that on your own?
As a planner, did I analyze the trips from other uses? No.
Okay. And is it your opinion as a planner that if this property was continued as a single family residence, that would more strongly promote the free flow of traffic than an 180 seat church?
I feel like that's an unfairly prejudicial question. There, of course, at a 180 seat church is going to have more traffic than a single family home.
Item I, you said was promoting the visual aspect of the property. Is that correct?
Promoting a desirable visual environment.
Okay. I may have missed it, but how does having a large building in the middle of a residential area improve and promote the visual impact on the area?
Mr. Howe testified earlier in the evening. I'm not sure that you were able to hear the benefit of his testimony, but he talked about the breaks in the elevation, changes of the building, the materials, the stone wall, and some of the things that he was doing to bring down the massing of the building. So I think that the board can consider all of those things. And the other thing I testified to was that the single family home that we're retaining along Hillsborough certainly preserves the view shed along Hillsborough, and that it will look more residential in character from that view shed by retaining that structure there along Hillsborough.
So you believe that having two buildings on the property in an area that every other building only has one promotes the visual impact of the project in the area?
I do. I think it's a very attractive church building. I think it meets and certainly far exceeds all the setback requirements for the zone. And I think that the zone contemplates specifically, uses the word facilities. And so I think that the zone contemplates having structures just like this come in comparison to or adjacent to residential structures. So I think it does promote a desirable visual environment.
I'm sorry, you said that you believe that the zone plan assumes or expects that there's going to be 2 buildings on the property?
I said it contemplates facilities of this scale next to residential structures.
You mean with 2 structures on it? Or you just mean facilities meaning a church or a school or something of that nature?
I think you could have 2 structures on a residential property. You could have a detached garage, you could have sheds. So I think what I was testifying or what I was specifically speaking to was the stated purpose of all of the residential zoning districts, which talked about establishing a distribution of population density throughout the township in relation to existing and prospective facilities. So when you look at that stated purpose of this R zone and all of the other residential zones, clearly it contemplated residential homes within relation to existing and prospective facilities. So I see nothing wrong with a structure of this size proximate to residential single-family homes. And I think not only does the zoning plan contemplate them, but it references that in the stated purpose of the R zone.
Is there anything that you've seen in your review as a planner that suggests that the Hillsborough master plan anticipated 2 structures in a residential zone of this size?
Anything that they anticipated 2 structures? Well, certainly by the fact that they have standards for accessory uses, that would tell me right there that the zone contemplates that you may have more than 1 structure if you're setting forth standards for that accessory structure. Clearly, most of the zones that I reviewed had standards for accessory uses and structures. So I would have to say that yes, that would point to the fact that the Hillsborough ordinance certainly contemplates that there might be multiple structures on a single piece of property.
Do you know whether any structures in the area have the accessory structure in front of the primary structure?
I did not look at that.
The last item I think you mentioned on the positive criteria was M, which was efficient use of land and stopping urban sprawl. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would having the property remain as a single family home better stop this urban sprawl and efficient use of land as opposed to the proposed 2-building church structure?
I don't think so. When you look at the master plan, specifically the 2018 master plan, which carried over certain goals and objectives from the 2008 master plan, one of those goals was to program and plan for the expansion of necessary public services and community facilities. That came right out of the master plan. So I don't think that retaining this as single family could be determined to not to be more consistent or to have less sprawl when the master plan specifically calls for the contemplating of programming and planning for expansion of those types of community facilities. And the master plan considers houses of worship as a quasi-public community facility.
Was the statement that you read specifically with regard to the residential zones, or was that a general statement for Hillsborough zoning overall?
I believe it was a general statement.
With regard to the negative criteria, you indicated that, or maybe didn't indicate at all, I apologize. With regard to traffic, you would agree that this proposed use is going to create more traffic than what's there now, correct?
Yes.
And that would be a negative impact on the neighbors from what's there now?
No, I didn't agree to that.
I'm asking you, do you agree to that?
No.
How would more traffic not be detrimental to the neighbors from what's there right now?
Because it's not traffic. Yes, there may be more traffic, but it's traffic that doesn't occur during the peak hour, and it's traffic that is not going to cause, as Mr. Dean testified, a substantial delay in any type of service to the area. So simply just because there's more traffic is not commensurate with a degradation to the negative criteria. I simply can't get there.
If you indicate that this traffic is off-peak hours, which means whereas right now there would be less traffic on a Sunday morning, there's now going to be more traffic on a Sunday morning.
There will be additional traffic, yes, as a result of this use, but the zone contemplates these type of uses here. So I don't think that you can say in a zone where these uses are contemplated to be, that having them then built is going to be consistent with the negative criteria or having a negative impact. That's the zone contemplates that churches be here conditionally. So then to go on and say, when you build the church here, it's going to have a negative impact. I mean, legislatively, the governing body decided that this is an appropriate location for these uses. You can't then say that you would come to a negative conclusion that there be a substantial detriment when you actually build the zone plan out in accordance with the use program that was contemplated for the site.
But under that argument, then any negative criteria from any approved use could be argued away because the approved use already considered the negative criteria and already upheld it.
No, that's not necessarily true either, because you could have a use that you're developing that does have a degradation to the level of services in the area, and that violates all the setback, and that operates at hours that are inconsistent, with a residential area. So here you have a use that is not going to have a substantial degradation on any of the levels of service in the area, as testified to by Mr. Dean. So I'm not sure how we're getting to the conclusion that just because there's more traffic, that this rises to the level, again, of having a substantial detriment. Let's be clear that the land use law does not, again, hold this or any other applicant to the burden of proof that there be no detriment, just that you have to balance the detriments and the benefits of the use. And I think the zone clearly contemplates houses of worship at this location. And certainly with a house of worship will come additional traffic. And there's no testimony, there's uncontroverted testimony in the record from our traffic engineer that this is not going to have a substantial detriment to the peak hour traffic or to the traffic flow in this area.
The negative impact of increased traffic, are you aware of any standard that is included in the Hillsborough Code that says that this board can only find there to be a negative impact of traffic if it meets a certain degradation of service as testified to by a traffic expert? Or can the board determine that the impact of the residents who now have more cars on their road is a sufficient enough negative impact if they choose to look at that criteria?
I'm not aware of that, or I'm not aware of any provision that says more traffic alone is commensurate with a negative impact.
Mr. Munch, are you asking that question for the board? I hope you're not, because it's not your place.
I'm sorry, I understand. I didn't catch the question.
This is John Stamler. You're not asking that question for the board, are you?
I don't understand what you mean by for the board. I'm not asking it to the board. I'm asking it to the witness.
No, for the board. You said, would it help the board twice? And I hope you don't refer to us, to the board, please.
Sorry, sir. I just want to make sure
you're not helping us out.
No, understood. I'm
Okay?
asking, I'm
Thank
trying
you.
to understand what the
Thank you.
witness criteria is with regard to what factors the board is able to
You
consider.
brought up, and I said, leave the board out of it and ask your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, Mrs. Zarro-Cafone, with regard to the impacts on the size of the building, how do you address the issue that neighbors who now live next door, when they go out to use their pool or their patio, whereas before they are seeing trees or grass in open space, now when someone's out using their pool, they're looking at a parking lot and people coming in and out, or a patio? Isn't that a negative impact of this application?
We're proposing buffering as well as fencing to mitigate those negative impacts. And again, Mr. Mensch, this applicant meets and exceeds all of the setbacks for this proposed building. So it is not this applicant's burden to completely obliterate the view shed of this building from the adjoining properties. That is not the intention of buffering. That is not the intention of setbacks. You will have a filtered view of the building with the setbacks and the fencing that's proposed, and the structure is located and situated on this lot in such a way that it conforms to all the setbacks envisioned for the zone for this use.
But in order to, when an applicant is looking for a variance, because you're requesting permission, any of these factors can be considered, correct? There's nothing under the law that says that impacts on neighbors can't be considered by a zoning board.
I'm sure the board will consider the impacts on the neighbors.
With regard to the waivers, there's, under what standard did you testify to that is met to justify granting the waivers?
The standard for the waiver is the board has to find that the waivers are reasonable and that the development application still meets the intent of the ordinance. So it's not like a variance where you have to testify to the C1 or C2 criteria. So I testified as to why I felt the waivers were justified.
Okay. And if the application was decreased in size, then presumably the waivers wouldn't be necessary and the applicant could meet the ordinance, correct?
I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. We could reduce the size of the building and there would still really be no reason, in my opinion, to increase the parking stall size from 9 by 18 to 10 by 20. I think that variance is routinely granted, or that waiver, excuse me, is routinely granted in Hillsborough, as well as many, many other communities throughout the state of New Jersey. When you have a use that just doesn't need a 10 by 20 parking stall, I think the same thing for the drive aisle. It lends to a more efficient use of the land and layout. So if we made the church building smaller, we could do that. But I think 9 by 18 is an appropriate size parking stall for this use, as
Thank
does
you.
Mr. Dean.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, so at that point, we can open it for the public not represented by Mr. Mensch. Frank?
Okay, anyone from the public have questions for this witness? Again, questions for the planner, please. Again, state your name and address, spelling your last name for the record, please.
Yeah.
This is
Right.
This is Lisa Elwood, ELWOOD. I reside at 35 Beverly Drive.
Thank you.
I had a question regarding the characterization of the neighborhood that was made by this expert. She mentioned the school in the area and compared it to the proposed church. I was just wondering, what's the distance between the school building and the closest home?
I don't have that exact distance, but based on my field visit to the subject property, I would imagine it's certainly less than 600 feet, which is to the rear, and substantially less. And as far as the improvements on the school property to the residential homes, I was in the parking lot of that school, and I probably could have hit at least 5 of the adjoining homes with a baseball, throwing it from the parking lot, and I'm certainly no athlete. So I would say far closer than what we're being proposed in conjunction with this application.
So what is the distance between the proposed building and the closest home?
To the rear, it's in excess of 600 feet. To the east and west is certainly less than 600 feet. I would have to ask Mr. Stiers to get us an exact number on that. But yes. I would say that's certainly comparable to the elementary school.
Okay, that's interesting. And there's been a lot of discussion on traffic. As you can imagine, the people in the neighborhood are concerned about 60 more cars being on the road. Has a traffic study been conducted?
Yes, our traffic witness testified at the last hearing, Mr. Dean.
He testified, and in his his letter, which he refers to it as correspondence. He says that this is not intended to serve as detailed traffic impact analysis, and that if this plan were to be approved, then a projected traffic impact would be more thoroughly studied. So at this point, it sounds to me like a traffic study of 60 cars and the impact on the neighborhood, that has not been done to this point, as far as I can see. Am I missing it?
I don't think that's a question really for this witness. You're reading for something from a report. Mr. Dean's testimony was conducted and completed. I suspect that Ms. Cavone could answer the question, but it's really only in referring to the same information that's been presented. So I don't think that's a question properly directed to this witness.
I was just following up on criteria H about the free flow of traffic that this planner was discussing. And she was basing her comments on a study, but I just am not aware of the study having been completed.
Well, certainly if you want to ask her whether what she meant by that and what she means by a study and whether she thinks what Mr. Dean did is a study, those I think are fair questions for this witness.
Okay, then that is my question. What did you mean when you said that there would be no impact on the neighborhood with 60 additional cars traveling in the area?
So what I didn't say that there was no impact. I said, of course, there's going to be additional traffic. I agree that there will be more traffic. I agreed with Mr. Mensch when he asked me that. But Mr. Dean studied the use, the projected peak hours. So he looked at those things to come to his conclusions. And he also looked at things such as the on-site circulation to provide testimony last month. So he studied all of those things, whether it was done in a formal traffic study. I'm not sure that that's warranted on a use that the zone contemplates. When you have a use that is contemplated by the underlying zoning, you look at, from a traffic point of view, you look at things a little bit differently.
So when you said that, yes, there will be additional traffic in the neighborhood, is there a way to quantify?
Well, again, I think
that's
that's a question that is appropriate for the traffic engineer, not for the planner.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Any further questions from the public to this witness? If you have them now, raise your hand. I see none, Chairman. I think you can proceed.
Okay, brother.
We have no further witnesses. If you want me to do summation now, Mr. Anderson, I can do that.
We need to see what is going to be presented by any objectors. We certainly know Mr. Mensch represents objectors. I do not know what he intends. And of course, there's a possibility that other objectors will want to present witnesses, maybe themselves or otherwise. So certainly, I think the board should hear your summation, but I think that should be after all the testimony is closed.
Okay, so not at this time. So we're at 10:16 and we normally don't take new testimony after 10 o'clock. So
it might be appropriate to ask Mr. Mensch, since I presume the board would hear from whatever witnesses he may want to offer as its next order of business, what it is that he does intend to present, so the board can have some feeling for where the matter is going from here.
Okay, Mr. Mensch.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We would present two witnesses. One is the property owner who owns the house, one of the houses next door, that would testify as a matter of factual issues. And then I have an expert planner who would provide planning testimony. Those are the only two fact witnesses that I intend to, or fact and an expert witness that I intend to present.
Okay, so then both of you would close at that point. Do we lose Mr. Mensch?
I think he's frozen for the moment. I don't mean personally, but his feed.
He hasn't moved in 30 seconds. There you go.
He's
Yes,
back.
the objector's testimony, and I put that in the plural, not just, there may be objectors other than those represented by Mr. Hagan.
Recognizing that members of the public now represented by Mr. Matt will also going to want to probably talk to us.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I do apologize. I don't know if everybody else, I lost everybody for a moment, so I apologize. One witness next door, one fact witness next door, one expert witness. Those are my two witnesses. I apologize if I'm repeating myself.
Okay, so it looks like we got at least an hour or two to close this, to wrap it up. Maybe.
No offense
I would
intended
think
to
that's
any
right.
planner who might be on, but an hour is being optimistic with respect to a planner, particularly with cross-examination.
Right, we're not getting this done tonight. We were hoping to get it done tonight. With two witnesses there, the summation wouldn't take long, but it's already 10:20.
You're going where I'm going, John. So, okay, so
it's gonna have to extend, yep.
So we need to schedule this, and we know that the May 1st meeting is already filled up.
No, Frank, let's
No, it is
carry
not.
this to May 1st.
We
Come
could
on.
carry to May 1st. It shouldn't take that long. Are we talking about two witnesses from Mr. Munch, you said, right? And then we have the summation. What else are we expecting?
Sir, the only other on our end, I don't know if the public may, the public certainly could present fact testimony, and then I don't know how many people are just going to comment about their opinions. Those folks not represented by counsel I'm referring to. I don't know if there's any of those folks out there.
Always, I see 27 people, and Mr. O'Brien maybe want to do a counter presentation after he hears Mr. Mention's. That could happen too.
So Frank,
Sure.
all the more reason to carry it to the May meeting, May 5th.
Right, carry it to the May 5th, and we'll put them up first.
Okay.
Because what do we have after that? In May, we'll have this application. We'll have Petrox, that'll be real quick. And McDonald's, we don't even know if we would finish that night anyway. So let's just get this done.
Okay.
We'll need an extension, Frank, right?
That is my understanding. Mr. Gorman, I think, can speak to that.
Yes, it'd be wise to put an extension on at this point. As I always advise the board, let's extend it out a little bit more than necessary, just in case there's any technical issues that we're not going back over the facts. I would suggest June 30th.
No objection.
Okay. Then motion to carry this to the next meeting, May 5th.
Yes. Motion to carry this to the next meeting, what's that?
Mark was saying something?
Yeah, Mr. Stanler, as you know, the usual question comes up, with or without further notice. I am guessing, but I will let Mr. Grodnick speak for himself. He will probably request that it be without further notice.
That's correct, Mr. Anderson. We feel that specifically, we've noticed this twice, and with the holding in the Pearl Mart case, I believe that that the notice adequately describes the nature of the application, such that the public and the board would understand the potential impact of this church use.
Mr. Ogrodnik, maybe yes would have sufficed.
No objection. We will happily grant the extension, and we would request no further notice.
It remains within the discretion of the board, but again, Mr. Stamler knows the rules.
Okay, so you don't want to give us a tutorial on that case, then, Mr. Grodnick.
What?
What'd you say?
Motion to carry this to May 5th.
Second.
Okay, those in favor?
Without, let's to make absolutely clear on the record, without further notice. That is the motion as I understand it. And let's want to make sure that that's the motion and the second.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, motion to adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just because we again may have people who are not familiar with the board's procedure, this discussion about notice, the result of that discussion for anyone who is participating in this, you will not receive any further notice. You will not receive anything in the mail. There will not be anything further in the newspaper. Your notice of this being carried is what you have just heard tonight.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everybody. Don't forget to turn off your Zoom.
Good night.
Good night.